Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
This week, North Carolina mailed out the first compensation checks to victims of a state-run eugenics program. It existed for almost 50 years, ending in 1976, and it was one of the most aggressive in the country. More than 7,000 people, poor, African American, or disabled, were sterilized, many against their will. Last year, North Carolina passed a law to compensate victims, but as we hear from Eric Mennel of member station WUNC, some of them have to fight harder than others to get their money.
In January 1972, two social workers went to the home of Deborah Blackman. She was about to turn 14. Court and medical documents offer some details about what happened. They point out that Blackman was, quote, severely retarded and had, quote, psychic problems that made her difficult to manage during menstruation. Her parents were counseled, and it was deemed in Blackman's best interest that she be sterilized.
My name is Deborah Blackman, and I was the one that had the sterilization a long time ago.
Deborah Blackman is 56 years old now. She has a hard time with the details, but she remembers a few things about that day at Charlotte Memorial Hospital.
My daddy said, don't hurt his baby, and he was crying.
We didn't find out till recently the extent and, exactly what all they did to her.
LaToya Adams is Blackman's niece. Adams grew up knowing her aunt had been sterilized, so after the compensation law was passed, she went looking for documentation. She came back with the mother lode. There was a court order, names of social workers, and the entire procedure outlined from pre-op to discharge. The doctor had labeled it a, quote, eugenics sterilization. And while it was a relief to have the information, it was also remarkably sad.
They were telling my grandparents that the surgery was going to be, minimally invasive. They told them that it would be a tubal ligation. And they wound up doing a full abdominal hysterectomy on a 14-year-old.
With all this evidence, LaToya and her family thought they had a case. They filed the paperwork and waited to hear back. The news wasn't good.
The denial letter, only thing it really stated was that there were no records found and that her case wasn't approved by the North Carolina Eugenics Board.
The problem lies in a technicality. The new compensation law says operations had to have occurred under the state's Eugenics Board. As it turns out, the Eugenics Board likely wasn't aware of all the sterilizations taking place. Judges and social service workers were greenlighting sterilizations as well. Bob Bollinger is an attorney representing Blackman and a few other people claiming to be victims.
And that's kind of become the fundamental problem here. You've got some old dusty file cabinet in Raleigh that's full of Eugenics Board paperwork from decades ago, but yet you've got all these people who got sterilized involuntarily where it was instigated at the local level, and their paperwork somehow or another didn't end up being preserved in the eugenics files in Raleigh if it was ever there to begin with.
A lot of people may have had this procedure done under the auspices of local county groups. They're not qualified.
Graham Wilson is a spokesman for the North Carolina Industrial Commission, the state agency deciding who qualifies for compensation.
They may think they're qualified, and obviously they had this procedure done to them, but if it was not done under the Eugenics Board of North Carolina, then they're not qualified.
Lawyers working with the victims estimate hundreds of people could fall into this category, people like Deborah Blackman. Blackman's operation was ordered by a judge who was part of the state court system. That judge cited a state law. So I asked Wilson, doesn't that make the state responsible?
That's kind of hard to say. I mean, again, it's an unfortunate part of our history. It was just, like a lot of things in our past, it was just something that was done. So it's kind of hard to say that the state would be responsible when it was just kind of an accepted practice.
Just something that was done. Context of White Supremacy, Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, June 3rd, 2016. So I have been told. The audio clip discussing the history of sterilizations in North Carolina, eugenics, population control, population tailoring, particularly of Black people in this area of the world. It did not just happen in North Carolina. We've talked about that on the broadcast before. You can go back in the past. We had Elaine Riddick's son, Tony Riddick. Miss Riddick, she was sterilized. She had her one child and they sterilized her after her only son was born. He was on the broadcast back in January of 2012. Without further ado, this is our 7th study session, Medical Apartheid, Harriet A. Washington. Phenomenal book. We are in chapter 8 on eugenics. We are specifically under the subheading. We're starting off with the Mississippi Appendectomy. Context of White Supremacy, Medical Apartheid, audio segment number 1.
The Mississippi Appendectomy. The pill may have been flawed, and the IUD deadly, but these methods were at least quasi-voluntary, and their effects were usually temporary. The most damaging threat to African American reproductive freedom has been invasive and permanent: compulsory surgical sterilization. When the infamous German eugenic sterilization initiative began in January 1934, 17 U.S. states were already performing sterilizations routinely, and that year, between 2,000 and 4,000 Americans were sterilized. Indiana passed legislation requiring the sterilization of the mentally unfit in 1907. By 1911, 6 states had passed laws providing for compulsory sterilization of the mentally unfit. In 1935, 27 states had such laws for the feeble-minded, those on welfare, or those with genetic defects. Forced sterilization was encouraged by the infamous 1927 Buck v. Bell decision, wherein Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes ordered the sterilization of the allegedly imbecilic poor white girl Carrie Buck, intoning, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." By the 1930s, compulsory sterilization had become a global enterprise, and by 1941, sterilization had been forced upon 70,000 to 100,000 Americans, 9,931 of them in California alone. African Americans have always been staggeringly overrepresented in the ranks of the sterilized. When the North Carolina Eugenics Commission sterilized 8,000 mentally retarded persons throughout the 1930s, 5,000 were Black. By 1983, when Blacks constituted only 12% of the population, 43% of the women sterilized in federally funded family planning programs were African Americans. This has been achieved under the auspices of a government fed by the myth of the lazy, hyper-fertile welfare mother. Say welfare mother, and most people think of an unemployed Black woman. Yet most women on welfare are not Black. A 1990 survey revealed that 78% of whites think Blacks prefer welfare to employment. But most Black women are employed full-time and hold at least one job, and women on welfare are likely to be employed part-time at low-wage jobs with few, if any, benefits. However, a Black woman is more likely to receive AFDC, Aid to Dependent Children, the form of public assistance given to people with minor children, than is a white woman. Black women constitute 6% of the population, but represent 1/3 of those on AFDC. And in some poor urban areas such as Baltimore, which is 86% Black, the majority of people on welfare are also Black. Forced sterilization and welfare have been linked for nearly half a century. Mississippi State legislator David H. Glass instituted a bold experiment when he sought legal means to force sterilization upon welfare mothers in 1958. By 1960, his Act to Discourage Immorality of Unmarried Females by Providing for Sterilization of the Unwed Mothers passed in the House by a vote of 72 to 37, but died in the Senate as the Black Activist Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, protested and distributed a pamphlet entitled Genocide in Mississippi. But most sterilizations of poor black women have been performed outside the law and in violation of medical mores. In June 1973, the abuse of 2 young sisters in Montgomery, Alabama, exposed the decades of stolen African American fertility. 12-year-old Mary Alice Relf and her sister Minnie, 14, lived on relief with their parents, who had left their meager living as field hands in an unsuccessful search for work in the city. A Montgomery Community Action Agency nurse took the girls to the hospital for a federally funded contraceptive shot and obtained the X of each illiterate parent on the consent form. But their parents later learned that the girls had been surgically sterilized, and they asked Atlanta's Southern Poverty Law Center for help. When SPLC filed a class action lawsuit to end the use of federal funds for involuntary sterilization, its lawyers discovered that 100,000 to 150,000 women had been sterilized using federal funds, and that half these women were black. Today, 1/3 of all adult Mississippi women and 57% of all Mississippi women 65 and older say they have undergone a hysterectomy. Sometimes the physician removed the woman's uterus on some pretext after coercing or tricking her into assent for unnecessary sterilization. The women were also sterilized while unconscious, as Fannie Lou Hamer was. In the South, rendering black women infertile without their knowledge during other surgery was so common that the procedure was called a Mississippi appendectomy. Involuntary hysterectomies were also commonly practiced in the North. A 1973 study by Bernard Rosenfeld of Los Angeles County Hospital discovered that doctors are cavalierly subjecting women, most of them poor and black, to surgical sterilization without explaining either the potential hazards or alternate methods of birth control. In most major teaching hospitals of New York, it was the unwritten policy to do elective hysterectomies on poor black and Puerto Rican women with minimal indications to train residents. In 1972, medical students at Boston City Hospital, BCH, protested the policy of performing unnecessary hysterectomies on black women in order to allow residents to practice. The students also complained that experimental procedures, the coercion of patient signatures, and falsifying medical records were common practice among black patients. So did students at Columbia University. The chairman of the BCH OBGYN program did not deny the charges, but blamed one bad apple. Across the nation, black women who trusted obstetricians to deliver their children were being surreptitiously sterilized, and this revelation poisoned relationships between them and their doctors. To accomplish the sterilizations, practitioners lied to patients, forged consent forms, or falsified medical records to reflect an appendectomy or gallbladder removal. So it is now impossible to know the exact number of African American women who were sterilized without their knowledge. Nor is there any record of how many such hysterectomies, if any, were medically justified. Some women, like Fannie Lou Hamer, were never told by their doctors that they had been sterilized, and others never found out. One of the few methodical surveys conducted revealed that at least 60% of the black women in Hamer's native Sunflower County, Mississippi, unwittingly suffered postpartum hysterectomies. By 1980, sterilization had become the most common form of birth control, and it still is, edging out condom use by 1%. But African American women remain far more likely than whites to undergo a hysterectomy, although researchers have known for over a decade that they are at higher risk of the procedure's complications and are more likely to die from the surgery. According to the National Center for Health Statistics, NCHS, 41% of black women who use contraception were sterilized, compared with only 27% of white women. Within a century, reproductive coercion had taken a 180-degree turn for black women. During slavery, black women had been forced to procreate, but now they were being forced into sterility. The consistent factor was white control. Women were also forced into sterility by governmental welfare programs, upon which unskilled black women workers relied to supplement their meager wages. While a social worker in upstate New York during the 1980s, I learned from old case files that during the 1960s and 1970s, social workers conducted frequent late-night raids on the homes of aid recipients. If a man was discovered, the family's aid could be cut off unless the woman agreed to sterilization, guaranteeing there would be no additional children for the state to support. Black women are still more likely than white women to be pressured or misled into sterilization, which tripled between 1970 and 1980, in part because hysterectomies are offered as the only curative option for ailments that can be treated more conservatively, such as fibroids and endometriosis. By 1978, doctors also began administering the drug Depo-Provera, but only in research studies and almost exclusively to poor women of color. Depo-Provera is the Upjohn Company's brand name for medroxyprogesterone acetate, which is also called DMPA. In 1978, the drug had just been FDA approved for use as a cancer therapy. In 1973, after the government discovered that beagles on which the drug had been tested developed breast cancer, it had refused to fund further testing of the drug as a contraceptive. Cancer medications carry significant risks, which are acceptable when one is fighting a deadly illness, but not when a healthy woman is simply trying to avoid pregnancy. However, licensed physicians may administer legal medications for any use they deem appropriate, and American doctors found it appropriate to administer Depo-Provera as an experimental contraceptive to healthy Native American and black patients. In 1978, the FDA criticized an Emory University study of Depo-Provera as having needlessly imperiled the lives of 4,700 women, all black. And in 1992, an FDA board warned, "Never has a drug whose target population is entirely healthy people been shown to be so pervasively carcinogenic in animals as has Depo-Provera." Listening to Norplant. Depo-Provera seemed discredited as a contraceptive, but in December 1990, the Food and Drug Administration approved another physician-controlled contraceptive, levonorgestrel, the Norplant contraceptive system, for use as a long-term contraceptive. Norplant consists of 6 small rods that a physician surgically implants into a woman's upper arm, using special tools and a local anesthetic. The rods slowly dispense the contraceptive progestin levonorgestrel, a form of the female hormone progesterone, for 5 years, after which the surgeon replaces the rods. Norplant suppresses ovulation, thickens the cervical mucus to bar the entry of sperm, prevents the development of a hospitable uterine environment, and may also discourage ovulation by suppressing the hormone lutein. It is extraordinarily efficient, with an annual failure rate of only 0.3 to 0.6%. With perfect condom use, 1 out of every 50 women will become pregnant each year, and so will 1 out of every 100 women who use the pill assiduously. But only 1 out of every 500 women using Norplant will become pregnant. A 1995 Journal of the American Medical Association article attributed Norplant's effectiveness to the fact that it is controlled by the doctor, citing the steady serum levels of levonorgestrel achieved and the fact that user compliance is necessarily 100% as long as the capsules are in place. Norplant was developed by the Population Council, a New York foundation that researches and tests contraceptives on poor women of color abroad. It has subsequently been used by more than 1 million U.S. women, nearly all poor. Planned Parenthood notes that 90% of Norplant implantations are paid through Medicaid in 43 states. A higher proportion of African American women than white women receive these implants, chiefly in public and low-income clinics. Why? Frederick Osborne, a Population Council founder, wrote, "Birth control and abortion are turning out to be major eugenic steps. But if they had been advanced for eugenic reasons, that would have retarded or stopped their acceptance." From the first, Norplant was selectively marketed not only to black women, but also to thousands of young black girls. The 50,000 Norplant kits implanted in 1991 to 1992 included some for black teenagers between 13 to 19 years old in the overwhelmingly African American Baltimore public high schools. This was justified by pointing to teenage pregnancy rates. But this solution to the teenage pregnancy problem was based on racist mythology rather than fact. In 1992, 73% of 15-year-old girls and 50% of 17-year-old girls were virgins, and more white teenaged girls than black girls became pregnant. Although epidemiologists did not immediately recognize it, the American teenage pregnancy rate had already begun falling, and the pregnancy rate of black girls displayed, and continues to display, the sharpest decline of any ethnic group. However, Baltimore is atypical in that it is mostly black and has a teen pregnancy rate that was 3 times the national average, and 10% of its girls aged 15 to 17 are already mothers. These demographics made the city a useful setting for a national experiment with a racial agenda. The Lawrence G. Paquin Middle School Clinic became the first site for Norplant implantation. 345 of its 350 girls were black. Thus, policymakers focused upon the fertility of black girls, and Norplant was deployed via school-based health clinics, the first 100 of which opened at black or minority schools. The Population Council has argued that the contraceptive's safety has been proven by 15 years of data from 55,000 women in 170 clinical trials. But in 1992, Norplant had never been tested in such young girls. Researchers were monitoring their health and reactions for the Population Council. In other words, Norplant implantation in these girls constituted a large-scale national experiment, and this research component placed pressure upon the school's clinic staff to achieve as near a 100% participation rate as possible. They, in turn, pressured all the girls to undergo implantation, typically citing confidentiality to bypass their parents. As one aggrieved African American parent put it, "My daughter can be implanted with Norplant or have an abortion without my input or knowledge via the school-based clinic. But my suburban co-workers field calls from school nurses who must get their permission to give their daughters an aspirin." It is not surprising that the conservative National Review praised the Baltimore experiment, declaring, "Better a prophylactic than an abortion," as if these were the only 2 options for black girls. But so did the New York Times and the Philadelphia Inquirer. The latter suggested, in an infamous December 12, 1990 editorial, that black women be paid to have Norplant implanted in order to reduce the underclass. Can contraception reduce the underclass? 2 stories from yesterday's newspaper. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration approves a contraceptive that can keep a woman from getting pregnant for 5 years. A research organization reports that nearly half the nation's children are living in poverty, and that the younger the child, the more likely he or she is to be living with a single mother on welfare. Growing numbers of them will not succeed, the study's author says. As we read those two stories, we ask ourselves, dare we mention them in the same breath? To do so might be considered deplorably insensitive, perhaps raising the specter of eugenics. But it would be worse to avoid drawing the logical conclusion that foolproof contraception could be invaluable in breaking the cycle of inner-city poverty, one of America's greatest challenges. Without proof, the editorial went on to link teen pregnancy and black poverty in a causal relationship, averring, "The main reason more black children are living in poverty is that people having the most children are the ones least capable of supporting them." More black children are living in poverty, but the black teen pregnancy rate is falling, not rising, so it cannot be the key impetus behind a surge in black poverty. In fact, poverty precedes pregnancy. The teen mothers are already poor, and children who are poor are at higher risk for precocious pregnancy. Most media analyses did not speak so directly of Norplant as key to stemming black reproduction. Instead, coded terminology such as inner city, underclass, welfare mother, and urban poor was widely understood to denote black women. Young girls become pregnant because of a complex set of psychological pressures and risk factors that a pill, a shot, or an implanted capsule cannot address alone. Girls at risk tend to be poor, academically struggling, and naive about sex and reproduction. They are usually preyed upon and even raped by older men. Yet the Inquirer reduced the wrenching quandary of teen pregnancy to a matter of Norplant, for which it suggested welfare mothers, black women, receive cash bribes. In 1991, Norplant fan David Duke, the Louisiana legislator and former KKK Grand Wizard, introduced legislation whereby women on welfare who agreed to Norplant implantation would be paid $100 annually, and other lawmakers have followed suit. Offering birth control to poor women is a laudable goal, but such schemes unduly entice them. The media and lawmakers' debates all stressed that Norplant is a safe contraceptive. But is it? According to a 1995 report in the Journal of Family Practice, 95% of women in a large-scale trial of Norplant had at least one side effect. 80% suffered menstrual changes, 32% experienced weight gain, 24% headaches, 16% mood changes, and 15% acne. Norplant is contraindicated for women with diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, a tendency toward blood clots, and acute liver dysfunction, all of which African American women develop and die from at higher rates than do white women. Norplant is also contraindicated in women with breast cancer, a disease that kills African American women at rates up to 20% higher than white women. The mood swings and weight gain resulting from Norplant pose serious risks for African American women, who already suffer from the nation's highest rates of life-threatening obesity and major depression. In fact, the contraceptive's efficiency drops from 99% to 92% in women who weigh more than 155 pounds, because its dosage is calibrated for smaller women. Beyond the viewing of a videotape, physicians typically were not trained in Norplant insertion and removal, which is more often complicated by thick, overgrowing keloid scars in black women. We learned some lessons from Norplant, said Dr. Trent McKay, a reproductive health specialist at the National Institutes of Health in 2002. As it turned out, at least in some cases, removal was a difficult process. Such effects drove 1 in 3 women implanted with Norplant to seek its removal within the first year. 3 years later, half had sought its removal. But women who decided that Norplant and its myriad health hazards were not for them often found themselves tethered to the contraceptive, because although Medicaid eagerly proffered the cost of inserting Norplant, it was less forthcoming with the $500 removal fee. Norplant was the subject of a recall in 2000, and it was taken off the market in July 2002. By the latter half of the 1990s, another physician-medicated long-term contraceptive had appeared to replace Norplant in low-cost clinics and African-American schools. The Depo-Provera injection, despite its checkered past as an FDA-condemned carcinogen. In 1991, 27-year-old Darlene Johnson's judge made her an offer she could not refuse. The California mother of four had spanked her 6-year-old daughter with a belt and an electric cord for smoking a cigarette, and her 4-year-old got the same punishment when Johnson caught her inserting a wire hanger into an electrical outlet. Now Johnson was frightened. She had pled guilty to 3 counts of felony child abuse, was facing prison time, and was 8 months pregnant. Enter Judge Howard Broadman, who offered her a choice of 7 years jail time or 1 year in jail and 3 years probation if she agreed to Norplant insertion. Johnson asked whether it was safe, and Broadman assured her that it was and could easily be removed if she experienced difficulty. Johnson agreed, but when she discovered that Norplant is contraindicated in women like herself who suffer from diabetes and hypertension, she changed her mind. Although the ACLU and even the district attorney joined her lawyers in urging Broadman to release her from the agreement, he would not. Ultimately, Johnson was jailed for violating her probation by using drugs. This rendered her case moot, but not the window it opened into the coercive use of contraception and sterilization by the legal system. During the 50 years since eugenics' heyday, the American courts have upheld procreation as a legally sacred civil right. In a 1942 decision, for example, the Supreme Court rejected an Oklahoma law allowing the sterilization of people who were convicted of multiple felonies involving moral turpitude. Yet, black women's fertility and their right to refuse medication is treated differently. Many Darlene Johnsons exist, nearly all of them black like her. Black women who abuse drugs are 10 times more likely than white women to be subjected to court-ordered long-term contraceptives or sterilization. Forced contraceptive use in response to allegations of child abuse is punishment, not therapy, because it does not protect the existing children, as counseling would. It delays, not prevents, births for the duration of the Norplant sentence. In any event, preventing a child's birth is a draconian method of protecting it from abuse. In 1994, the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy in New York City accused the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston of illegal drug testing and illegal human experimentation. According to a complaint filed with the National Institutes of Health, the hospital tested poor black women who had voluntarily gone to the hospital to seek prenatal care for drugs without their consent, then reported those who tested positive to the police. Between 1989 and 1994, approximately 40 of these women were arrested, some of whom gave birth while shackled to their hospital beds. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Civil Rights Director Dennis Hayashi mounted a civil rights suit because all except one of the prosecuted women were black. The sole white arrestee, as her nurse noted in her medical record, lived with her boyfriend, who was a Negro. The hospital also conducted illegal research with these women. This selective arrest and prosecution of black women fits an insidious national pattern, according to Zita Lazzarini, J.D., M.Ph., Director of the Medical Humanities, Health Law, and Ethics Program at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. 86% of women prosecuted and jailed for drug abuse while pregnant were black. A 1993 study of women whose offspring had been exposed to cocaine prenatally found that black and Latino women were 72% more likely than white women to have their children removed by Child Protective Services. Public clinics in urban settings test and report more vigorously than do private clinics, and this helps drive the racial disparity. However, contrary to media representations, black and white women abuse drugs at the same rate. So one would expect equal drug abuse rates among pregnant black and white women. And this is the case. Several studies, including a 1990 New England Journal of Medicine report, found no significant racial difference in drug use between pregnant black women, 14.1%, and pregnant white women, 15.4%. But these studies indicated that black women were 10 times more likely to be reported to law enforcement officials. The myth of the crack baby. In September 1985, the New England Journal of Medicine published research by Dr. Ira Chasnoff, an associate professor of pediatrics and psychiatry at the University of Illinois, that described his findings that babies born to cocaine-using mothers remained smaller, sicker, moodier, and less social than other infants. His investigation, however, was tentative and profoundly flawed. It had no control group, and he had studied the children of a mere 23 women, far too few to infer anything about prenatal cocaine exposure in general. Chasnoff himself was careful to note these methodological shortcomings as he urged larger, more meaningful studies of prenatal drug exposure. Instead, his research was swallowed whole, then regurgitated in a racialized form by newspaper, magazine, and even medical accounts that focused sharply on babies harmed by the smokable form of cocaine, crack. African Americans and whites use cocaine at similar rates, but blacks are twice as likely as whites to use it in crack form. However, 80% of drug users are white, and in raw numbers, twice as many whites as blacks use crack cocaine. This means that white crack users should be twice as easy to find, but most people's image of the crack user is informed by media accounts that had focused nearly exclusively on African American users since the early 1980s. Now, Americans associate crack with blacks, and crack users' infants, dubbed crack babies, are always portrayed as black. During 18 years as a news and science editor at metropolitan dailies and national magazines, I have never seen a published photograph of a white crack baby. The putative harms done to crack babies were first popularized in graphic detail in 1989 by Washington Post columnist Charles Krauthammer, who warned, "The inner-city crack epidemic is now giving birth to the newest horror, a bio-underclass, a generation of physically damaged cocaine babies whose biological inferiority is stamped at birth." These infants, he claimed, constitute a race of subhuman drones, whose future is closed to them from day one. Theirs will be a life of certain suffering, of probable deviance, of permanent inferiority. The dead babies may be the lucky ones. By inner city, Krauthammer meant, of course, black. Douglas Besharov, of the American Enterprise Institute, who coined the phrase bio-underclass, did not shy from the racial label. This is not stuff that Head Start can fix. This is permanent brain damage. Whether it is 5% or 15% of the black community, it is there. Krauthammer's column triggered a cascade of national headlines describing these infants as born addicted to crack and neurologically damaged to the point where they constituted a permanent army of inferiority, miniature golems who could never be human. USA Today bewailed crack babies born to life of suffering. In its piece, Crack's Toll Among Babies, A Joyless View, Even of Toys, the New York Times detailed how maternity wards around the country ring with the high-pitched cat cries of neurologically impaired crack babies. Americans were told that these children were so easily overstimulated that they had to be secluded in darkened hospital rooms for weeks after birth, while hospitals researched the best way to treat these border babies. Pediatricians, such as UCLA's Judy Howard, MD, regularly validated this perspective for journalists, as when she told Newsweek that the brain function that makes us human beings capable of discussion or reflection had been wiped out in these children. News accounts warned that as they grew larger and stronger, these children would become fearsome adversaries in the classroom and on the playground. In September 1989, 2 months after Krauthammer's column, a Washington Post article warned of a time bomb in cocaine babies the next year. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch declared flatly, "Disaster in making. Crack babies start to grow up." In 1992, a San Diego Union Tribune headline shuddered, "Drug babies invade schools." None of this had been demonstrated by research, and none of this was true. Although exposure to cocaine in the uterus can damage a fetus, a baby cannot be born addicted to cocaine, as children are sometimes born addicted to other narcotic drugs. Neither is there any difference between prenatal exposure to cocaine and to crack cocaine. Moreover, the diagnosis of crack baby is based upon a woman's positive drug test, not upon the baby's clinical picture, so it makes no distinction between mothers who smoke crack habitually and those who did so rarely. There is no such medical entity as a crack baby. A 1991 meta-analysis, a retrospective analysis of the many research articles dealing with crack babies, in the Journal of Teratology, found serious methodological flaws in this research. The studies in question lacked control groups of non-exposed babies for comparison, and they failed to differentiate cocaine's effects from those caused by prenatal exposure to other drugs, including tobacco and alcohol. The latter cause much greater long-term disability than does cocaine. The studies also failed to take into account pertinent environmental factors such as poor nutrition and housing conditions and the dearth of quality prenatal care. For more than 7 years, Chicago's National Association for Perinatal Addiction Research studied a group of 300 children born exposed to crack. Researchers found that their IQ scores were the same as children who were not crack exposed, but who lived in similar environments. As sociologist Ernest Drucker notes, even cocaine use in high doses during pregnancy is not unequivocally linked to any fetal defect other than low birth weight and small size. The vast majority of infants born to drug-using mothers are as healthy as other infants born in poverty. Why were such glaring research flaws ignored for so long by experts? For example, Washington Post columnist Krauthammer, who raised the journalistic hue and cry, is a graduate of Harvard Medical School, and I wonder that he did not consider these dramatic scientific shortcomings before suggesting that the children in question should not have been born. In 1989, the British medical journal, The Lancet, showed how papers reporting that cocaine harmed babies' behavior were more likely to be accepted for publication than those showing no harm, even when the latter described better-designed studies. In 1992, a Journal of the American Medical Association editorial condemned the rush to judgment about cocaine's long-term effects on children, calling the evidence far too slim. But the harm has been done. The imaginary crack baby epidemic remains real in the minds of most Americans, providing yet another exemplar of African-American bad mothering. In 1989, the Los Angeles Times wrote of how parents who can't say no are creating a generation of misery. The Washington Post told us, "For pregnant addict, crack comes first." And a New York Times headline showcased an awkward amalgam of sympathy and cost consciousness. Crack's tiniest, costliest victims. The myth of the crack baby also helped to fuel criminal prosecutions against pregnant drug abusers. 3/4 of which have been filed against women of color. Even private citizens promulgate both long and short-term sterilization as the only solution. In 1997, a group called CRACK, Children Requiring a Caring Community, papered inner-city billboards with offers of $200 in cash for cocaine-addicted men and women willing to undergo sterilization or submit to long-term physician-mediated birth control, such as Norplant. The organization refuses to share current ethnic data, but figures from its unguarded beginnings reveal that 60% of its first 158 recipients were Black or Hispanic. As of mid-January 2004, CRACK had chapters in at least 16 cities and had paid 1,141 clients to surrender their fertility. CRACK, or Project Prevention, as it is now known, specializes in crack abuse, not the prenatal use of more dangerous drugs or alcohol, so its claims to put children's health first are specious. Its slogan suggests the depth of its disdain for addicted Black women. Don't let a pregnancy ruin your drug habit. The reproductive freedom of African Americans has been assailed by discouraging the birth of inferior Black progeny and by curtailing the fertility of Black mothers. Flawed eugenic judgments continue to shadow the lives of African Americans, from the putative crack babies who are now stigmatized teenagers to teen girls who are judged rather than counseled and protected from male predators. Chapter 9. Nuclear Winter. Radiation Experiments on African Americans. If anybody knows how to do a good job of body snatching, they will really be serving their country. Dr. Willard Libby, Nobel Prize Laureate, on Operation Sunshine. On a dewy spring morning in 1945, Robert S. Stone, M.D., a usually quiet, deliberate professor of radiology, burst into a neighboring office at the government's Oak Ridge, Tennessee nuclear facility, shouting, "Carl, you remember that nigger truck driver that had this accident some time ago?" "Yes, I remember." Dr. Carl Z. Morgan, director of the Oak Ridge Health Physics Division, was nonplussed. Why was a trucker's month-old accident of any consequence? "Well," gushed Stone, "he was rushed to the military hospital in Oak Ridge, and he had multiple fractures. Almost all of his bones are broken, and we were surprised he was alive when he got to the hospital. We did not expect him to be alive the next morning. So this was an opportunity we've been waiting for. We gave him large doses by injection of plutonium-239. No witnesses lingered to describe the accident, but on March 24, 1945, trucker Ebb Cade of Greensboro, North Carolina, was one of 4 passengers who suffered severe injuries and was taken to the Manhattan Engineer District Hospital in Oak Ridge. Doctors said he would not live, but medical fortune smiled on him. He rallied quickly, and within days was recovering nicely. Then Cade's luck ran out. Unknown to him, the hospital physicians assigned to his care were under contract to the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, AEC. They were also under the supervision of Stone, the AEC Assistant Health Director, who had been searching for a moribund patient to inject with plutonium. On April 10th, without his consent, and 5 days before setting his broken bones, military physician Joseph Howland injected Cade with 4.7 micrograms of plutonium, 41 times the normal lifetime exposure. The man-made element plutonium is a fiendishly toxic radioactive substance, one that Cade's body would harbor forever. The half-life, or time it takes half a dose of plutonium to disappear, is 24,056 years. Colonel Stafford Warren, director of the Manhattan Project's medical section, described plutonium as the most dangerous chemical known. "They gave him a whooping dose of plutonium," recalled Morgan in 1995, when speaking to an advisory committee on human radiation experiments, ACHRE interviewer. Wright Langham, the chemist who devised the human experiment, justified the toxic injection by explaining to Manhattan Project physicians that the subject was an elderly male whose age and general health was such that there is little or no possibility that the injection can have any effect on the normal course of his life. But Cade was only 53 and held down a grueling job hauling long trucks. Except for a cataract, he enjoyed excellent health. Before they set Cade's broken legs, AEC doctors completed higher priority tasks. They extracted bone chips and pulled 15 of his teeth to measure Cade's newly elevated plutonium levels. Only then, 5 days later, did they set his broken bones. 6 months later, Cade was still in the hospital, and in a September 1945 letter, Captain David Goldring, M.D., of Oak Ridge, informed Langham that more bone specimens and extracted teeth will be shipped to you very soon for analysis. But before he could lose more teeth or bone, Cade slipped away. One morning, the nurse opened his door, and he was gone. Morgan recalled, they were surprised that a black man who had been expected to die got up and walked out of the hospital and disappeared. They were also disappointed. Doctors had hoped to autopsy Cade's body, because the purpose of the injection had not been to treat Cade, but to experimentally calibrate the plutonium's physiological devastation. Langham hoped to pinpoint the dosage at which a radioactive element such as plutonium causes illnesses such as leukemia. To do this, doctors injected, or otherwise introduced, a specific amount of a known radioactive substance into a body. Then they periodically measured the amount of radioactivity that lingered in the subject's blood, tissues, bones, urine, and feces. The AEC also sought to follow up changes in the subject's health status to determine the exact health effects of different radioactive elements. We know today, for example, that different radioactive elements have affinity for particular parts of the body. Radon gas raises the risk of lung cancer, while radium lodges in the bones, where it triggers cancer. AEC scientists sought to make similar determinations that would help them to regulate soldiers' wartime exposures and to control the level of exposure in peacetime workers at nuclear power plants or uranium mines. But it was difficult to follow subjects, and the scientists' own errors also sabotaged many experiments. For example, scientists in Stone's laboratory mistakenly mixed Cade's initial pre-exposure bone samples with samples taken after his injection, rendering future determinations impossible. Cade returned home to Greensboro, where he died 8 years later of heart disease, unrelated to his injection. He is one of many involuntary radiation experiment subjects. As this chapter will demonstrate, many of these subjects, perhaps most, were African American. Between 1944 and 1994, the AEC supported more than 2,000 experimental projects utilizing radiation and human subjects. Overall, blacks were at higher risk than whites of being subjected to these harmful, non-therapeutic experiments. Between April 1945, scant months before the bombing of Hiroshima, and July 1947, the scientists of the Manhattan Project followed the construction of the atomic bomb with a chilling second act: medical experimentation on hundreds of unsuspecting Americans. Pioneers of nuclear science, such as J. Robert Oppenheimer, Louis Hempelman, and Stafford Warren, masterminded scores of radiation experiments from the headquarters they carved out of the shimmering rust-colored earth of the New Mexico desert in Los Alamos. In one series of experiments, Manhattan Project doctors injected plutonium into between 18 and 20 men, women, and children. They acted without obtaining the consent of these people, informed or otherwise, and without therapeutic intent. The Manhattan Project scientists shrouded themselves in secrecy, referring to their subjects only in code. Cade's was HP-12. The HP stood for human product. Scientists never publicly referred to the nature of the injections. The word plutonium was barred from their vocabularies by a December 1972 memo from Argonne National Laboratory investigator Robert E. Rowland, who reinforced a long-standing verbal taboo. Outside of CHR, we will never use the word plutonium in regard to these cases. In AEC parlance, plutonium became product, or 49, an inversion of its atomic number, 94. Eb Cade was the first American to be injected with massive doses of plutonium during this small 1940s pilot program under the direction of the AEC and the DOE. As in the syphilis study of Tuskegee, the victims thought their doctors were caring for them. Claims of imminent death were made in order to justify the toxic injections, but most subjects left the hospital alive, and 10 lived for many years after the exposures. Such outrages strike our post-Tuskegee world as positively diabolical. But the medical Wunderkinder and politically savvy scientists who designed these experiments thought it necessary and logical to expand the boundaries of scientific medical knowledge into new radioactive frontiers. We might never have known the details and the identities of the victims had not reporter Eileen Wellsome masterfully investigated dozens of such experiments in her 1987 Pulitzer Prize-winning series for the Albuquerque Journal and her book, The Plutonium Files. Through 7 years of unreturned phone calls, governmental rebuffs, and derailed Freedom of Information requests, she doggedly pursued victims' identities. In one such program, soldiers were shipped to the desert for deliberate exposure to the detonation of nuclear bombs. In another, unsuspecting patients in private and public hospitals, from Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester, New York, to Vanderbilt University Hospital's prenatal clinic in Nashville, were injected with plutonium infused with fluorine, or otherwise used as subjects in various experiments to calibrate the physical damage associated with various dosages of radioactive matter. The moribund pregnant women and their fetuses, the poor, the mentally ill, and children in institutions all risked attracting the fatal attention of doctors of the Manhattan Project. Products of this research, including exposure data, death rates, and cancer incidence statistics, and even radioactive excreta and body parts, were forwarded to Los Alamos. The percentage of African American subjects in 1945 hovered around 10%, but lawyer E. Cooper Brown, who represented plaintiffs in radiation suits, has estimated that 60% were people of color, mostly African American. One such subject, Elmer Allen, was on top of the world when his path intersected with that of government doctors wielding syringes of plutonium. He was happily married to the former Fredna Hadley and the father of 2 children, Elmerine and William. Allen had escaped the gravity of the pre-integration South for a California life that he loved. Leaping from trains into the mild evening air, Allen sauntered home to nearby Richmond as mists rolling between the perfect cobalt skies and the waters of San Francisco Bay provided a postcard background. The halos crowning the lights of the bay imparted a dreamlike atmosphere, within which every ambition must have seemed in reach. For a black man who had grown up bound by the rigidly circumscribed racial mores of the segregated South, where hostility tainted the very air and violent constraint was never far off, the Bay Area offered intoxicating freedom, its colorful streets buzzing with genial people of every hue and nationality. Allen's job as a Pullman porter paid $400 a month, rich wages for that time, so he could afford to indulge his wife and spoil his children while dreaming of the education and opportunities they would soon enjoy.
Context of white supremacy. That will do it for the first audio segment. We are in Chapter 9. We will pick up and hear what happens to Elmer Allen during the second audio segment. I will only repeat what I said last week. This has been a just staggering read. Definitely a top 5 choice in terms of books that Gus T Renegade would recommend that offer painfully accurate information about racism, white supremacy, what it is, and how it works. Wow. I can only repeat, in my opinion, this is the standout line of the book thus far. We're a little beyond the halfway point. But the portion where she says, within a century, reproductive coercion had taken a 180-degree turn for black women. During slavery, black women had been forced to procreate, but now they were being forced into sterility. The consistent factor was white control. It does not get any more accurate than that. Context of white supremacy. If folks would like to participate, the number to dial is 641-715-3640, and the code is 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. The number again is 641-715-3640. The code is 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. If you do not want to use your phone, you still want to participate, you can use the free HD line, the free VOPE line. It's linked at Black Talk Radio Network. If you need the address, it is tiny, TINY.cc/1 race, and that is the number 1. The address again, tiny, TINY.cc/1 race, and that is the number 1. When you enter the address, click the link on the left of the page. It says free VOPE line. When you do so, it will open a small window on your screen. On the top line, it's a drop-down menu. Select the number that I just gave out. It is 641-715-3640. Next line, it will ask for the code. That code again is 564943. The final line, it will ask for a name. You can use your real name. You can use a nickname. You can press random keys if you like, whatever you're comfortable with. Once you get all that information entered, click the green button at the bottom. It will connect you to the live broadcast. You should be able to hear us live, and it is the same procedure if you would like to participate. You'll see the dial pad on your screen. Press star 6. You will hear an audio prompt. Press the number 1. I'll see your hand. We will get you on the line. I will hit the phone lines now. I will again remind folks for the book study session, just like the compensatory call-in, I just open the lines up for people that dialed in. If you know you have a lot of noise in the background, use your mute button. Please do not have speakerphone on. If you are listening to the program, it would be good to just go ahead and turn it off because you can hear it on the phone, obviously. But we just pick up all that background noise, and it just makes it difficult. Other people, when they're trying to talk, they have all that stuff going on in the background, so you can lose your train of thought and what have you. So just use your mute button if you know you're in a noisy environment. If you are not able to mute, then I can do it for you, but I generally just open the lines up and just hope people can either use their mute button or hopefully they will be in a quiet environment so we don't have all the disruption on the line. Alrighty, everybody who dialed in with a hand up, your line should be open. Feel free to chime in if you have commentary.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings to you, Gus, to all the callers and the listeners. Wow, this section we read, it's hard to even put into words just how much it affected me. The section you read is exactly, it was one of the things I was going to speak about. Just that one thing set everything in motion. And it's funny because I underlined the word control, but I wrote next to it white supremacy. Wow. It's hard to put into words this section alone. And it's just a treasure trove of white psychopathology. I want to start on page 202. There's a section that says, by the 1930s, compulsory sterilization had become a global enterprise. And by 1941, sterilization had been forced upon 70,000 to 100,000 Americans, 9,931 of them in California alone. And then she goes on to state in the following paragraph, African Americans have always been staggeringly overrepresented in the ranks of the sterilized. When the North Carolina Eugenics Commission sterilized 8,000 mentally retarded persons throughout the 1930s, 5,000 were black. And by 1983, when blacks constituted only 12% of the population, 43% of the women sterilized in federally funded family planning programs were African Americans. Wow, this is just such a Dr. Welsing moment for me, just in the sense that, and it goes back to one of the sections that we read, where she stated that in the beginning, it was about raping black women to procreate, to use them to make babies that they can sell off or you make money off of in one form or fashion or the other. And then now it's about killing as many of us as possible. Like they say in Martha 21, they're going to either womb lynch the baby by abortion or just lynch the womb itself, which is what it seems like there was just an all-out war on the black woman's womb. And it really speaks to when they had no more use for Africans in regards to the chattel slave situation, because they were thoroughly aware that the vast majority of the world's population was non-white, and that black people constituted the most genetically powerful of those people, then they set about on a global agenda of population reduction. And this is what just reminds me of what Dr. Wilson talked about. Even Neely Fuller. It's a worldwide prison plantation that they've orchestrated where they control everything. And it's almost nauseating to read some of these sections. Hello?
That's what I said about people making noise in the background. I muted their line, though. Sorry about that, Roz. My apologies.
No problem. It's okay. On 205, there's a section that says, within the century, reproductive coercion had taken... Oh, you read that. We just talked about that. My bad. That's exact. See, I had it underlined. I went right to it. On page 209, it says, the media and lawmakers debate all stress that Norplant is a safe contraceptive, but is it? According to a 1995 report in the Journal of Family Practice, 95% of women in a large-scale trial of Norplant had at least one side effect. 80% suffered menstrual changes, 32% experienced weight gain, 24% headaches, 16% mood changes, 15% acne. Norplant is contraindicated for women with diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, a tendency towards blood clots, and acute liver dysfunction, all of which African American women develop and die from at higher rates than do white women. Norplant is also contraindicated in women with breast cancer, a disease that kills African American women at rates up to 20% higher than white women. The mood swings and weight gain resulting from Norplant poses serious risk for African American women who already suffer from the nation's highest rates of life-threatening obesity and major depression. In fact, the contraceptive efficiency drops from 99% to 92% in women who weigh more than 155 pounds. Because this dosage is calibrated for smaller women, beyond the viewing of a videotape, physicians typically were not trained in Norplant insertion and removal, which is more often complicated by thick, overgrown keloid scars in black women. We learned some lessons from Norplant, said Dr. Trent McKay, a reproductive health specialist at the National Institute of Health in 2002. As it turned out, at least in some cases, removal was a difficult process. This really speaks of what we talk about, where we've talked about, matter of fact, melanin apocalypse. Norplant, to me, from what I'm reading, is one of the first drugs that was specifically designed to kill black people, specifically black women. If the drugs itself is showing such heavy contraindications in people of African descent who have a predisposition to these diseases because of racism, white supremacy, and then they go about systematically giving this and forcing this on our women, then to me, this is like concrete evidence here of the genetic assault on the black body, and most specifically and sadly, the African woman. We got a lot of work to do because this is horrifying to even put. There's no words that you can utilize to really describe the sickness of these savages. I find a telling sentence on 211. He writes, during the 50 years since eugenics' heyday, the American courts have upheld procreation as a legally sacred civil right. And to me, just using the term since eugenics' heyday, it gives a false impression that eugenics has ended or that we're in some place that's better than what it used to be when they've just perfected and become way more refined at killing our people. So to me, that seems to be just an area in which she might have been more confused as far as the verbiage, or again, if the editors had doctored her words in some way to make it sound different than what it was. I'm trying not to take too much longer. On 213, there's a brief section that says, these infants, he claimed, constitute a race of subhuman drones whose future is closed to them from day one. Theirs will be a life of certain suffering, of probable deviance, of permanent inferiority. The dead babies may be the lucky ones, speaking of crack babies. And shortly below that, it says, Krauthammer's column triggered a cascade of national headlines describing these infants as born addicted to crack and neurologically damaged to the point where they constituted a permanent army of inferiority, miniature golems who could never be human. It's really interesting. This reminds me, they're describing these young black children as the Walking Dead. If you look up what a golem is, it's actually a stone or clay figure that shows up in Jewish lore, where it can be magically enchanted to come to life and basically do the bidding of the person, like a zombie. And from what I understand, one of its uses was for retribution. So if someone did something to you and you wanted to harm them, you would create this golem that's supposed to be able to come to life. And similar to Frankenstein or a zombie, would be able to go kill this other person or other group of people at their behest. And this really speaks to, again, what they want to do to us is zombify African people or describe us in that fashion, so that shows like The Walking Dead become so popular that it's just a wholesale murder fest of simulated black people who they call The Walking Dead. I'll just stop there right now, but I'll probably chime in if we get an opportunity later, because there's a couple other things I wanted to talk about, but I want to give other people an opportunity to share. Thank you so much for taking my call, Gus. I appreciate it.
For sure. Other folks who had commentary they wanted to add in, feel free.
Yes, ma'am. Here.
Yes, sir.
Okay, greetings, Gus. Greetings to the other callers and listeners. First, I'd like to give kudos to the host, Gus. He's been, an excellent host, and I've learned a lot from him through the years. I guess most of what I know about racism now I can attribute to learning from him on this show. So kudos to Gus. But I'll start out with scientific racism. Claims of scientific evidence showing superiority or inferiority of certain races, such as negritude, drapomania, supposed to be mental illness described by Samuel Cartwright. To me, this scientific racism and the exercising of it is the exact meaning of pseudo-scientific BS. And it's interesting that all of this pseudo-science, and then Tim Wise, will refer to Dr. Wells's work as pseudo-scientific BS. But if anything is BS, most of this stuff that they were trying to set the foundation on how to mistreat black people was pseudo-scientific BS. So on page 203 They was talking about the involuntary sterilization. That by 1983, blacks was only 12% of the population, but 43% of the women sterilized in federally funded programs were black women. And I thought that another interesting statistic was that over 57% of all Mississippi women 65 years and older said that they have undergone hysterectomies. So it looked like they were just having a field day, just robbing women of their female parts. I also thought it was interesting that SNCC SNCC was instrumental in stopping, by legal means, the forced sterilization upon welfare mothers. And 1960, I guess some congressman wanted an act to discourage immorality in unmarried females by providing sterilization for unwed mothers. But I, also noted that those students that was instrumental in putting a stop to that in the early 60s, by 1967, 1968, the Committee of Un-American Activities in the House of Representatives had already started investigating them as a subversive influence in America, which just goes to show you that any time that you try to do something in a positive manner, the system will come back to try to, divert and to make it look like it, not really is. So, and I also accuse the major newspapers. The Washington Post keeps getting mentioned, the New York Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, St. Louis Post, and San Diego Union Tribune, all of them, their ideologies was feeding into this scientific BS. So they stand accused. On page 206, I think the doctors began administrating contraceptives. So it's doctor-assisted contraceptives, which also ultimately some led to sterilization. They were using DMPA, which was Depo-Provera, on poor women of color, supposedly under the disguise of contraception. And actually that drug was used for cancer therapy. It was not proven as any contraception, but, I guess the book was saying that if a physician felt it could be used in some other capacity, then they had the right to do that to subject women of color, young women, even after tests had showed that this drug had caused cancer in beagles. The doctor-controlled, contraceptives were kind of something of a choice because they could, control the administration of the chemicals or the drugs. And they mentioned that David Duke, who was a past of the KKK, introduced legislation to pay welfare mothers a certain amount, I guess, if they agree to have the Norplant insertion done. And quickly, I want to talk about this Judge Howard Broadman, who sent us, I think her name was Darlene, let me see if I got her name. Anyway, he sent
Darlene Johnson?
Darlene Johnson, yeah. He sentenced her to, he gave her a choice. Yeah, she could take 7 years in prison, I guess, as opposed to 1 year in jail, and then the rest in probation if she would consent to the Norplant. But you know, she was already pregnant. So what kind of person does something like that? This judge was also known for other creative sentences, forcing people to wear T-shirts proclaiming they was on probation, and made a man donate his car to a shelter. And he crossed the line when he was forcing this young lady to take the Norplant insertion. And some guy, I guess he was a right-to-life activist, entered his courtroom, Harry Raymond Bodine, and fired a .357 at the judge's head. He barely missed him. And Harry Raymond Bodine was sentenced for attempted murder. He's in prison today, and it's ironic that his parole hearing is coming up in July. But, you know, I just want to quickly say I wanted to mention Eb Cade, the guy who in Greensboro, North Carolina, where the hospital physicians assigned his care, you know, shot him up with plutonium. And the old chemist who Wright Langham, the chemist who devised the human experiment, justified the toxic injection by explaining to the Manhattan Project physicians that subject was an elderly male whose age and general health was such that there is little or no possibility that the injection can be made any effect on the normal course of his life. But Cade was only 53 and held down a grueling job hauling, you know, long hauling on trucks. Except for a cataract, he enjoyed excellent health. They took that poor man and injected him with the deadliest chemicals known to man. And also quickly, Elmer Allen, the poorman, we didn't get into him much, but he was paid $400 a month. And after his accident, you know, and his subsequent injection with some chemicals, his job at $400 a month would be equivalent to $6,000 a month in 2016. Just to give you an idea of the racism that was practiced against these men. I'll mute my line and give somebody else a chance. Thanks, Gus, for taking the call.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. See, all the folks that we have not heard from, if you dialed in, we haven't heard from you yet. Line should be open. Feel free.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to chime in on about that welfare and Depo-Provera, whatever it's called. My youngest brother, he's on public assistance, and he has 3 daughters, but his oldest daughter, she has a different mother, so she was raised by her mother, who was not on public assistance. So she had 3 children. His oldest daughter had 3 children, but his younger 2 daughters, they lived with him. Their mother was mentally ill, and so he's a public assistant. He was forced to get his daughters sterilized or have the Depo-Provera injected into their bodies, because I was asking him one time, because both girls are adults now, and the one girl is mental like her mother, but the youngest girl, she's sharp and she's smart, and I asked him why he didn't ever let the daughter have children, because the youngest girl, she loves babies and stuff, and he said, well, told me that he was forced to do that, and I remember both girls, they were quite small and shapely, had nice figures, and now they're big, and I got big square bodies and all that because of that Depo-Provera, and I guess they have had trouble with that, and he's had to take them to the clinic for all kind of problems associated with that, like arthritis and extreme mood swings, especially the one that's mental. She's had extreme mood swings, and he said that they're only in their late 20s, early 30s, and they have the kind of health problems a person would have in their 50s or 60s. And also, my older sister, when she was younger, she was kind of in the streets and stuff, and she would fool around with a lot of guys, and she got pregnant twice. And my mother got her abortions, and she got her that's what they said. She got her tubes tied. I guess that's what they called it. But it was supposed to be known or something at that time that if you had your tubes tied, they would come loose after 5 years. So my mother had died in the interim, and my sister, when she got older, she settled down and she got involved with this guy, and they moved in together, had a place, and she wanted a baby, and she realized that she couldn't, and she realized she had been sterilized for good. And just to think of it, and just to talk about the way we have been programmed to think as black people. When my daughter was 19, she got pregnant, and I told her, I said, well, you're going to have to get an abortion because it doesn't seem right. It's not right, for you to be not married and have a child. And she, she looked kind of sad and everything. And I went to work, and I thought about it. I'm like, wait a minute, this is stupid. That's my grandchild. I'm wanting for my grandchild to be murdered because my parents have been taught to believe that if the girl is young or is not married, she should get an abortion, and it's been passed down through my mother's side of the family because they were, I hate to use this word, but they were always kind of snobbish, and they have done that. That's the cause of my mother's twin sister, reason why she died, because she was kind of out there in the streets, and she had got quite a few pregnancies, and my grandmother had got her abortions. So when she wanted to have her own baby, she did, but it was too much for her body to bear. And so 3 months after her baby was born, the baby lived, but my mother's twin sister, she died, and they think because her system was all messed up, because back then, they didn't have, I guess, the procedures where they suck the baby out. I think they would have to go into you with coat hangers and all that. But I was just thinking about how backwards that thinking is. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with us bringing life into the world. And I had to train myself to think a whole nother way, because the way white supremacy has taught us as black people to believe that you're bad, you're dirty, you're nasty if you have unprotected sex, or, if you're not married, stuff like that. And my daughter, she has an eating disorder, so she ended up having a miscarriage, and it was really painful for her because the baby was supposed to be born on my birthday, and it took her a long time to get over that and everything. But that's just a story I wanted to share. And I always wanted to have grandchildren, but so far I have not been blessed with any grandchildren and stuff. And so I just wanted to share that story, and I mute myself. Thank you.
Ashe. Definitely the damage takes a personal toll, and over generations takes a personal toll, what racists have done to us on so many levels, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Any folks that we have not heard from at all, if you had a commentary, feel free.
Yes, sir. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I would just like to dedicate my comments to the speedy recovery and better health for Muhammad Ali. First thing comes to my mind is the phrase, the abominable white people. It just goes to show you on how proficiently corrupt the system of racism, white supremacy is. And I don't want to just give it that type of title, because there's a group of people who are called white people who are behind this, who actively, on a daily 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week basis, orchestrate this corrupt behavior by having dominance over all 9 areas of activity, and in turn, by corrupting that for non-white people, especially non-white black people, you're going to immediately have bad health. From the top of our heads to the bottom of our feet is what this book is illustrating to me. I don't even have the book, but just by listening to it on a weekly basis, it categorically goes down the line of how efficiently corrupt white people are, and what they say and what they do. And I would even dignify what is being heard in this book as being medical. To me, it's more like butchery. A butcher, what a butcher would do, or some sort of crazed butcher would do to a person, especially to our mothers, our aunts, our sisters, our wives, and any or black females in general, but also black males too. And it goes with the past. It goes over the past. It goes over what took place in recent quote unquote history. And I'm pretty sure before we get through with this book, it's even going to be talking about what's going on presently, as clearly as it's illustrating in past in far back past and recent past, meaning 40, 50 years ago. So I can see on why you were saying that everybody should have this book. And this book is one of the most important books to have understanding and knowledge of, because these things are going on as we speak. When you are able to control and corrupt the atmosphere of a group of people, you can easily come into that and do whatever you want to do to their bodies. I mean, it's not rocket science, to have that ability to be able to do that with impunity, And there's an oath that a lot of us know called the Hippocratic Oath, which basically states that do no harm. And that's why I say this doesn't have anything to do with medicine. This is something else other than medicine. In a real sense, I can understand putting the titles and the words to it from a standpoint of expediency and conversation, but actually, the best word for it is white supremacy, as far as that's concerned, and how our health is corrupted, and so this is just some of my observations and thoughts that I'm attempting to express. Hopefully, I gain some understanding of what I'm saying. Thank you.
For sure. Other callers that we have not heard from, if you had commentary, feel free.
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, this is Martha, and I want to commit all the comments I heard tonight. They were very good. The part where they talked about the myth of the crack baby. I was like floored. I was just floored. I had been a nasty certified drug and alcohol counselor for some years and worked in the mental health field for a number of years. And this is the first time that I'm hearing and believing that a baby cannot be born addicted to cocaine. Okay? And then they talk about on page 214, and it went down. They talk about the research, how the vast majority of infants born to drug-using mothers are as healthy as other infants born into poverty. And then they asked the question, why were such glaring research flaws ignored for so long by experts? Well, maybe Michelle Alexander gave us the answer in her book, New Jim Crow. And I went back to the book that I have here. And it talked about how Reagan turned the war on drugs into a literal one. And at the time he declared the war on drugs, he was saying that the drug crime was on the decline. But anyway, so his administrator, H.R. Holderman, President Nixon's former chief of staff, he described the strategy, and this is a quote, the whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to divide a system that recognizes this while not appealing to. And what Ronald Reagan did and his wife, and I can remember the times I watched on TV and they talked about crack babies and it, was going on in the black community. And in her book, she was saying how crack began to ravage inner city communities, and then Reagan administration seized on the development and actually had high staff whose job was to publish inner city crack babies, so-called crack whores and crack-related violence. This is what she wrote. So I think this was it was political. I had no doubt in my mind. And look at the impact. Look at the impact that this have on, because it's still in the community days where the community mental health system and medical doctors still have us believing in crack babies. But look at the impact that it had. You take the mother and the child. First, the mother finding out that her baby, quote, is a crack baby. Okay, and then if the child develops, I guess, on some level, maybe they'll find out. But what happens with the mother and the child? You're talking about guilt, suicide. You can talk about low self-esteem. You can talk about depression. This is going to serve your mental health clinic. Okay? And then the child grows up now, they're able to go to school, they're labeled, I don't know, whatever. And then they're going to be facing special education programs in the school system. Okay, to hear another system just being served. And then from there, the child may be put in foster care, which is another service now. It's going to be handed down politically because maybe the mother's not around, there's no relative. So here the child now is in the system. Now, the child is grown up now. He got self-fulfilling prophecy. The child is actually now believing something is wrong. Maybe heard, my mom was doing crack when she had me, all this stuff. And this is very dynamic. There's a very dynamic variables that plays on the psyche, especially, when you're very, very young. Okay, so the fourth system that it was served as a child develops and comes to understanding that something's wrong with label. I'm in special ed, I'm in foster care, my mother's on crack. Now we can look at Dr. Umar Johnson's pipeline to prison. Because from this point, the child may end up in a juvenile system because they're withdrawn. They have low self-esteem. I mean, they're so busy, the child's so busy being focused on his inner feelings that they can't really recognize what's going on around them, education, what's needed. But they're just too introvertedly preoccupied. So this is a horrible, horrible situation. Let me just say this, Gus. I went to your archives and I listened to you while you were talking with Mr. Neely Foley Jr. And I think the guy's name is Mr. Managio. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right or not.
Cleo Manago?
Yes. And you asked him the question, did he think that white people were the smartest people on the planet, was trying to think something to that effect? And he said no. He said, I think they'll be limited. And this is no more proven than this book. These people white people are motivated, if I'm saying this right, by their savagery on us. They are so motivated and so determined to keep our image destroyed through media, through medical records, through the prison system, or whatever. They are just so relentless. They haven't missed a beat since they brought us here to Africa. So, when I heard him say that, this is not to rush Mr. Neely Crowley Jr.'s, idea about them being the smartest people, out here. It's this idea, too, that they are extremely relentless. They will destroy us in any way they can and perpetuate all these lies and put images on TV. I mean, they are relentless. They just are very relentless. They're very crazy. Their psychosis, to me, is a different type of psychosis, because usually when you're psychotic, you really don't know what's going on. But these people are psychotic, and they know what's going on. So, that's something maybe I could research in the future, because it is a different type of mental illness that white people have, where you can do all of this, and then you just, it's normal, and just go about your day-to-day business. Your psychosis says you have a break with reality. That's the definition, that I've been taught. But it don't seem like these people have a break with reality. Again, to them, what they do to us, it's just so normal and so casual and so matter-of-fact. So I just wanted to, I appreciate everyone listening to me, but it just really floored me, because I've been in the business for a long time, and I know I fell, I fell for a tour, like they say, I drink the Kool-Aid. So, but it's something else now that I can go and re-educate our people about. So, Gussie, I want to thank you too. You're doing a brilliant job. I appreciate it. And I appreciate y'all letting me into, this, into the program and listening to me while I share some of my thoughts. So, thank you very much.
For sure. Are there other folks that we have not heard from? People that we have not heard from? If you had commentary, feel free.
Good evening to the host, and good evening to all the other callers. This is Karma, and Gus, I think you're doing an outstanding job too. I would be so confused if I didn't have you guys to explain things to me. As far as the myth of the crack babies, I got to tell you, I believed every word. I believed everything. I believed every bad thing they ever said about us. I believed every bad thing they ever said about those children. I was sound asleep. And I have to tell you, these Germanic albino tribes, they lie about everything so much. So I remind people of the fact that they are willing to admit too similar, or I quote, a bit more, or I quote, slightly higher drug use by Europeans lets you know that they are overwhelmingly the major drug users on this planet. I mean anything. They'll drink, smoke, guzzle anything. And I can tell you, because I live that white life. And I just, my mouth, I had to keep it shut with my hand. They ingest so many drugs all the time. So please know that they are the number one drug users, and they'll take anything. They'll do anything. And also about the crack babies, this is what they would do to get data. They do a drug test on the mom. They go, there's some cocaine in the system. So they separate the mother and the baby right then and there on the first day. And, of course, this is like massive trauma to the baby. Nobody ever looked at the mother, but this is massive trauma to the baby, that they are separated on the first day from their mother. And then they bring in these albino, elderly, octogenarians who call themselves being pillars of the community to sit with the children for an hour or two a day, just like that, in the darkened room, just like they were saying. And they go, these babies are so fussy. They don't eat. They don't want to eat. They're always whining. Because they've been deprived of their mother. No, they're not going to respond like normal children. They separate those children from their parents at birth, and they don't do anything. They don't do anything to nurture them. and they just get these elderly white women to come in once, an hour or two a day. Ooh, it's just creepy. But also about the Depo-Provera, even though they don't tell you when you join the military, the fact that you don't have anyone who has to withdraw their tour because they've become pregnant, they are injecting each and every one of those military women on active duty with Depo-Provera. They have to be. They have to be. And I never hear anybody saying anything about it, so they don't tell them. Let me see. Oh, and also it's just like the other caller said, how the children have the same IQs and everything. There's the hard the Europeans, they never want to say, well, these children don't have what they need because they never have what they need. They don't have what they need. It's just the creepiest thing in the world that they look at you and say, look at you. You don't have what you need. And it never occurs to them because you don't have what you need. So, anyway, I just wanted to say that, this is also, it's just really awful. It's just really beyond awful. And thanks for listening to that. Bye-bye.
Right on. I think we got all the people that dialed in thus far with the hand up. If there were other folks listening who had commentary, we will get you before we get to the second audio segment. Some of the comments, some of the things that stood out for me, I was remembering the section last week. I think Roz and some other folks noted the portion where they were talking about the IUDs. These are other contraceptives, long-term contraceptives, where she said, this is in Chapter 8, where she said Dawkins shields were primarily dispensed in inner-city clinics. Some activists charged that black women had been targeted to test a form of birth control known to cause sterility. However, this is unlikely. Scientists clearly hoped that the devices would work well, not fail. And I think last week we were saying that is just, that seems illogical, that the overwhelming evidence in this book and within the system of racism, anything that is causing this type of widespread harm to black people, and where this device, this form of contraception, was specifically targeting black people, you just have to conclude that this was done deliberately, that this was chemical and biological warfare specifically targeting black people. I think just what we heard this week was just more of the same, that this is not accidental, this is not a coincidence, this is war against black people. Moving forward to things that stood out from this week in the text. Let's see. The portion, there was so much that I was nonplussed reading the information that we got today. They just had a book that came out. Imbeciles is the name of it, talking about the 1927 Supreme Court case Buck versus Bell, about, it's okay if you want to sterilize. We've had 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. I just thought that was significant because I hear people say that Clarence Thomas is the worst justice of all time. I think people were saying that when they had the voting rights decision back in 2013, and even last week when they had the decision about having all white jurors and he was the lone dissenting opinion. And I said back in 2013, I would say again now, when you study the history of what some of the whites on that bench have said over the years, particularly cases that have dealt directly with racism, man, I don't think Clarence Thomas stands. Anything that he has said or done pales in comparison to what many of these other justices have said over the last few decades, years, what have you, of the Supreme Court. Just the staggering numbers when you talk about how focused these forced sterilizations have been on black females. When she says in North Carolina that they sterilized 8,000 mentally retarded persons throughout the 1930s, and that 5,000 of them were black, and black people aren't even the majority of the population in North Carolina, that is amazing. By 1983, when blacks constituted only 12% of the population, 43% of the women sterilized federally in federally funded family planning programs were African American. That is, again, this is not coincidence. This is strategically, methodically planned biological, chemical warfare against black people, all the way up to Flint, Michigan. Continuing It says a Montgomery Community Action Agency nurse took the girls to the hospital for a federally funded contraceptive shot and obtained the X of each illiterate parent on the consent form, but the parents later learned that the girls had been surgically sterilized, and they asked Atlanta Southern Poverty Law Center for help. When SPLC filed a class action lawsuit to end the use of federal funds for involuntary sterilization, its lawyers discovered that 100,000 to 150,000 women had been sterilized using federal funds, and that half these women were black. Again, strategically targeted warfare against black people. And in my opinion, this is the sort of thing when I think about Nurse Rivers or really any aspect of racism, white supremacy, where it's glaring. That seems to be one of the main themes of this book, where the black people clearly were not informed. They just did not know, had no idea the scope of what was happening to them individually. And I think something else that is important, that this is not something that is just isolated to one individual, that this is widespread. Like when you pull back, like, oh wow, this is not me, that this is happening to hundreds of thousands of black females, that this is happening to, and I mean probably even millions when you pull back and look at the numbers beyond just one particular state, what have you, in terms of just widespread worldwide warfare being conducted. And even I would take a portion like this, you could apply this to what we learned last week about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, or any number of things that we've heard in this book thus far. It's painfully obvious white people are way more informed about racism than black people are. And I think a lot of people, they have, for whatever reason, that's a whole nother conversation. It's just been my conclusion that for whatever reasons, many victims of racism beyond black people have a very tough time accepting that concept that white people right now, they are proving they are smarter. That sentence that I read at the beginning of the section, where it said that it took a 180-degree turn during slavery. It was raping black females to make them reproduce. And then after slavery, it was sterilizing black females to halt their reproduction. I have to be smarter than you to be able to carry that out. Now, people can put whatever words they want to put on it. At the end of the day, if you don't have enough information to stop that from happening, I'm just going to conclude that I'm smarter about what's happening right now until you can do something to change that. Now, again, if people don't like it, I don't think anything is uglier than having a group of people that are clearly your enemies, and they could decide whether or not you're going to have a child, and you don't have enough information and or power to do anything to stop that. They are smarter than you until proven otherwise, in my opinion. Moving forward, where they talked about just the cavalier nature of all this, where she says, in 1973 study by Bernard Rosenfeld, a Los Angeles County hospital discovered that doctors are cavalierly subjecting women, most of them poor and black, to surgical sterilizations without explaining either the potential hazards or alternate methods of birth control. In most major teaching hospitals of New York, it was unwritten policy to do elective hysterectomies on poor black and Puerto Rican women with minimal indications to train residents. Just using black people, we're just using you to study so that we can learn and get even smarter about how we go about abusing and terrorizing you. I mean, just that's why I said it is amazing. I just sat in awe reading and listening to some of the portions that we heard this week. It is amazing. And again, I don't know how you can read something like that and come to a conclusion other than, at least at this moment, not that it's permanent, white people have clearly shown we are more informed about this than you are. You don't even know what we're doing to you until 50 years down the line. You're still trying to figure out what has happened to you after it's too late to even correct some of these things. Moving forward. Oh my God. All of the information about the crack babies. This was one of the moments, and we don't have anything to brag about under the system of racism, white supremacy, because we are still at the bottom of the boat, back of the bus, unfortunately. However, just reading this book, I was checking some of the footnotes. Dorothy Roberts is all over Chapter 8, as she should be. I'm a huge fan of her work. She's a 3-time guest on this program. I've mentioned her repeatedly throughout this book because she's been quoted. She's in the footnote. If you go and if you look through the footnotes as we're reading, you'll see her name pop up over and over and over. She was on the program. Her book, Killing the Black Body, she talked about this. That book was published in the 90s, 1997 specifically, Dorothy Roberts, Killing the Black Body. She's a black female professor at the University of Pennsylvania. She was on the program in 2009. We spent extensive time talking about that whole racist deception of crack babies. And she's referencing quite a bit of the material from that exact book, Killing the Black Body, in which she presented in this chapter about how they just make up stuff totally. I think Karma talks about that all the time, where they just lie. Whites will come out. We're experts, of course, so who are you going to be to challenge it? We just say anything. And again, same thing, where it'll take us 20 years in some instances to figure out, oh, wow, they just lied and made all this stuff up. They didn't even do any research to come to these conclusions. We can just say anything about the niggers. And this will justify us being able to further degrade and abuse them, again, before they even realize what has happened. I hadn't heard anything about it until I read her book in 2009, so I was way late on the curb in learning that was total fiction. And I remember, I think when we talked about that in 2009, there were other folks who said they had never heard it. Anybody, if this is your first time hearing about that all of that about crack babies and everything was just total racist deception, that is another book that is in my top 10, Killing the Black Body. I was amazed when I read it, and her scholarship is just impeccable every time out. You should read all of her material, Dorothy Roberts, but you should absolutely read that book, Killing the Black Body, and you should check out that broadcast. It's August of 2009. Moving forward, there's the quote I already read. While a social worker in upstate New York during the 1980s, I learned from old case files that during the 1960s and 70s, social workers conducted frequent late-night raids on the homes of aid recipients. If a man was discovered, the family's aid could be cut off unless the woman agreed to sterilization, guaranteeing there would be no additional children for the state to support. Again, just the sort of things that are exclusively done to black people. And I mean, it doesn't get any more blatant, in my opinion, flagrant warfare under any guise. The only people who are they subjected to these sort of no-knock raids, we come to serve a search warrant at 3 o'clock in the morning, as they did with Fred. We come in the middle of the night. Social workers come in the middle of the night. That is warfare. That is total racism, white supremacy. We can come in your area at any time. And I would even add, when I've heard people say that the solution to racism, white supremacy is quote-unquote separation, what are the mechanics of that? In my opinion, if you're talking about separation, do you have the apparatus to stop white people from coming to your territory? Any white people, whether they're social workers, police, doctors, whoever they happen to be, do you have the ability to stop white people from coming to your area? Thus far, I have seen no non-white people on the planet who have the ability to say white people are not allowed here, and we have the means to enforce it to make that so. If you cannot, then I don't think separation is going to solve the problem of racism, white supremacy. Just following the logic. Moving forward, the group, the Population Council, I would certainly think people should have a lot of knowledge about who this group is, what they do, since it seems like they're funding a lot of these projects, Norplant and other contraceptives and things that are designed to attack black people. We should have a lot more information about who this group is, who are some of the members, be able to name names, Steve Coakley says. The portion where she says Norplant was selectively marketed not only to poor black women, but also to thousands of young black girls. The 50,000 Norplant kits implanted in 1991 and 1992 included some for black teenagers between 13 to 19 years old in overwhelmingly African-American Baltimore public high schools. I was staggered on that for many reasons. I thought of Henrietta Lacks. I thought of Freddie Gray. And I thought of, even though I've never seen a single episode of The Wire, whites are so skillful in their ability to be able to put out content like that where it can portray black people in a bad light, even though people might say that show was designed to show the drug war and all this and what have you. I could easily see how a lot of people would watch that sort of program and just think black people are monsters and savages, and I never would want to live in Baltimore, where you do not understand the war that has been waged on these residents, these black Maryland residents for centuries to understand how things ended up in this manner, where when you're subjected to this sort of chemical warfare on all levels, not to mention the lead poisoning and everything. I mean, it's just, oh my God, it's just constant attack. My head even hurt. I think when we had a listener in Virginia where she said, I think someone said before on a program years back that everything is not about racism. Sometimes, you know, some of our behavior, some of our thoughts and what have you, they don't have anything to do with racism. And she said, I don't think that is accurate because just the racism, white supremacy operates on so many levels. I think it's hard for us to even grasp how many things white people are doing to us before we're even born, as this book illustrates, after we have died, all the time in the middle between those 2 points of birth and death. It is amazing when you start to get more information, just wow, how much of our behavior, the mood swings and all of this, maybe it has something to do with what they've done to your water. Maybe it has something to do with chemicals that they gave your mom while she was, you know, had you in her womb for 9 months. Maybe it has something to do with the stress you've been subjected to for your entire existence on a planet dominated by white terrorism. It is absolutely staggering. I can only say again and again. There were a few other things that I didn't even get to chapter 9. I'll maybe see if I can get in one more comment, then I will stop. Yeah, the drug thing, I thought that was nonsense. When they tried to suggest that it was about even, that is total hogwash. Whites use way more drugs, and the only times that they're honest about the fact that whites use more drugs is when they're talking about prescription medication, heroin, crystal meth, and then they'll be honest and say, oh yeah, it's staggeringly disproportionate numbers of white people who are using and abusing these drugs, even have access to these drugs. In my opinion, that is the case across the board. They have much easier access. Even if you look at some of the studies when they talk about stop and search, the ones that I've seen consistently, what they've said is that they have consistently found way more contraband drugs on white people when they have stopped and searched them than black people. That, again, to me, just supports it is not close at all. It is way disproportionate numbers of white people who are using and abusing these drugs. They just lie, again, and just make it seem like it's kind of close, or black people abusing, or whatever other nonsense. I'd say that was going to be the last one, but I highlighted so much. It's just amazing reads. Anything else that I feel like is I've got to get in before I stop? I will save everything I had for chapter 9 because we really just kind of started that, so I'll save that until we get to the next portion. Let's see. Yeah, I think I'll save everything else until I get to after the next audio segment. We are pretty much there. We had some people that dialed in kind of late. I will take one call from a person who dialed in kind of late, and then we're going to the second audio segment. So the people that didn't get to share during this section, you can share after the second audio segment concludes. Let's see. The one person we'll get Lady, upstate New York caller. Do you want to get your comment in before we get to the second audio segment?
Yeah, about the birth control. When I was, let's say about 12 years ago, they were still doing programs. They had signs up when I got my first apartment of offering $500 to, they say Thai to instead of the, formal name, for women who had substance abuse issues. I remember calling the number, and I didn't know any better. And I said, well, I don't have any substance abuse issues, but I want $500, and I don't have any kids. I'm only 18. And they told me, sure, come on in, but we'll only do it for you if you have a resident. And I said, well, I don't want a resident because, they're not trained, or they're just learning. And so they wouldn't do it because I would not allow them to let a resident do the procedure. And my mom found out that I wanted to do this at 18 and just went ballistic. Why are you going to get your tubes out? You're only 18. I'm like, well, I don't want any kids. I don't want to be a single mom. So fast forward well over 12 years, no doctors, no nurses in the women's health practice that I am can stand the fact that I do not have my tubes tied, or I'm not on the IUD, or these things, and I have I had to frankly one time just say, I'm old enough to know if I want these things, and I don't need to. I don't need those things. They do not like it. I've had literally 30-minute conversations of them bringing in one nurse, another doctor, one after another. Why don't you want this? Why don't you want Depo? Why don't you want the Norplant? Why can't we give you the IUD? It makes no sense that you don't have this. You have 2 children. You need to get this. And literally, it just makes no sense that they are dead determined. Even after having each of my children, I only have 2, the doctors would come in and say, you don't need any more kids. You need to let us give you this. When the baby first cries, it kind of hurts a little bit when they're newborn. And they say, that's only going to get worse every time you have a baby. You need to just not have babies. So it just, hearing this kind of makes me remember or think about those times where I'm like, boy, these people are acting kind of strange. Another thing with the crack babies, unfortunately, we had some members in our family who were addicted to these substances, and honestly, their kids are doing really well, like all of them. None of them grew up to be just these raging teenage moms with 20 kids, or thug guys who are hustling, and none of these so-called things that they said were going to happen to those children happened. The youngest of one will be in October graduating from nursing school, and she's graduating early. She'll be 19. So that definitely is a complete fallacy about their IQ, about them being problem children. I mean, they honestly turned out better than some people, some of the children who had 2-parent homes, who had parents who owned their own homes and cars. So, that's one about that. And I guess I'll mute my line and listen to the rest of the audio. Thanks for letting me comment.
For sure. Folks that did not get a chance to comment during the first section or after the first audio segment, just make a note of your comments, observations, and anybody that did not get to share, you will be first up once the second audio segment concludes. Again, we're in Chapter 9. We will pick up and hear what happens. Unfortunately, the black male subject, Mr. Elmer Allen, will hear nothing but bad things in this book, so no reason to think anything good is going to happen to Mr. Allen. But we will proceed. Medical Apartheid, Context of White Supremacy, Chapter 9.
Everything changed in an instant on September 3rd, 1946, when Allen fell from a train in Chicago. He fractured his left leg, a very common occupational injury for a Pullman porter, for whom bouncing from just-stopped trains to platforms was part of the job. But the Pullman Company refused to accept responsibility for the accident, and Allen hobbled from the hospital to his home for a recuperation that was never to be. The Pullman Company terminated him without compensation of any kind, leaving him unemployed and unemployable, with a dwindling bank account and a painfully swollen, ulcerated leg that wouldn't heal. A private physician diagnosed chronic inflammation and hemorrhage in his knee, but could make no recommendations for a cure. Suddenly, the sunny foothills and swirling mists of the bay composed a mocking backdrop to Allen's growing anxieties. With a painfully halting gait, he dragged himself up and down the steep streets of San Francisco, searching for a doctor who could straighten his leg and deaden the raging pain. A year later, his knee had swollen to 3 times its normal size, while his bank account shrank to $25. Mounting medical bills and overdue rent drove him in desperation to the place he had avoided for so long, the University of California, San Francisco's, UCSF, free clinic. There, he was diagnosed with chondrosarcoma, a cancer of the bone, On July 18, 1947, Allen's left leg was injected with plutonium-238, an even more radioactive isotope than the plutonium-239 given the other patients. He had just become subject Cal-3. This never should have happened, because in late 1946, between the injections of Cade and Allen, the Judicial Council of the American Medical Association had set new standards for the protection of human subjects. In order to conform to the ethics of the American Medical Association, 3 requirements must be satisfied. 1. The voluntary consent of the person on whom the experiment is to be performed. 2. The danger of each experiment must be previously investigated by animal experimentation. And 3. The experiment must be performed under proper medical protection and management. Furthermore, the AEC physicians could hardly have pleaded exemption on the grounds of military or governmental expediency, because in April, just a few months before Allen was injected, the AEC had passed its own more specific rules governing medical experiments with humans. It should be susceptible to proof from official reason that prior to treatment, each individual patient's being of an understanding state of mind was clearly informed of the nature of the treatment and its possible effects, and expressed his willingness to receive the treatment. In view of your recommendation, the Commission does not request that written release be obtained in such cases, but it does request that in every case, at least 2 doctors should certify in writing, made part of the official record, to the patient's understanding state of mind, to the explanation furnished him, and to his willingness to accept the treatment. These dense, wordy AEC regulations also required an expectation that it may have therapeutic effect. But after a February 1995 UCSF review of the case file, the hospital admitted that Allen's physicians had expected no therapeutic effect, so the experiment violated that rule as well. Allen's medical record indicates that he was told something of the procedure he was about to undergo, and 2 doctors signed a medical chart note to that effect. But the statement did not conform to the AEC's own standards, because the physicians neither explained the true purpose of the injection nor sought Allen's permission. Allen's family says that the injection was described as a form of therapy, a last-ditch measure to save the leg. Allen's daughter, Elmarine Whitfield Bell, adds, "My father was not an educated man. Even had they told my father that he was injected with plutonium, that would be like telling him that he was injected with ice cream. He would not know the difference." 3 days later, Allen's leg was amputated. Today, Bell feels certain that her father's bone cancer was a deliberate misdiagnosis, made so that researchers could amputate and study his leg. I don't think there is any record anyplace of anyone living more than 8 years with that sort of bone cancer he is supposed to have had. Actually, people with chondrosarcoma that is treated appropriately often live a normal lifespan, so Allen's longevity was not unusual. In Allen's medical chart, UCSF doctors had indicated that patients with this type of tumor frequently survive many years beyond diagnosis if there is complete excision of the primary tumor. This provided a compelling therapeutic reason to excise the area around the tumor and, perhaps, to amputate Allen's leg. The doctors characterized his tumor as malignant but slow-growing and late to metastasize. Prognosis therefore moderately good. They were right. Allen lived until age 80, 44 years after his diagnosis of bone cancer. But who could not understand his daughter's distrust, which was shared by her close-knit community, after the revelation of her father's exploitation? The first thing people did when they learned of this was express sympathy. The next question they always asked was everyone in the experiment black? They were not. By most accounts, 18 Americans were injected with plutonium. But according to a July 1947 statement by Robert Stone, By race, there were 15 white and 5 blacks injected. Thus, in the plutonium experiment, blacks constituted 25% of the subjects at the time when they were approximately 10% of the population. This means their rate of involvement was 2.5 times greater than it should have been, given what proportion of the population they constituted. However, there is no indication that blacks were specifically sought out for plutonium injections, as they were in some other experiments. The dearest costs of Allen's experimental status was not medical, but social. Although he lived 4 decades after his amputation, these were dark ones for Allen. He moved with his family to his wife's hometown of Italy, Texas, but was unable to readjust to life in the South, where his physical disability and psychological pain made it difficult to find steady work. Allen drank excessively for a while and suffered epileptic seizures. Worse, he was unable to shake off the conviction that he had been abused by the San Francisco doctors and robbed unnecessarily of his leg. With uncanny accuracy, he insisted that he had been subjected to experiments related to the injection he had been given, and insisted that doctors had taken his leg not to save his life, but in order to study it. Allen spoke often and bitterly of these convictions, but not even his family members took his suspicions seriously enough to ask why they had arisen. Only Allen's best friend, Joe Speed, believed him. Speed told journalists flatly in 1994 they guinea-pigged him. When I called Elmer Allen's widow, Fredna Allen, in 1994, she was gracious but firm. My emotions won't allow me to discuss this, but you can try talking to my daughter, Elmarine. My father's life was not good. Elmarine Whitfield Bell sighs from her home in Italy, where she has taught for decades at the Edison Middle Learning Center in nearby West Dallas. You know how difficult things are for African American men, especially a man with little education. Think of it. He was lucky enough to land a job paying $400 a month, plus tips, in the 1940s. He worked there 6 years, but to suddenly lose a leg and his job and have to move back to the South from California, which he loved, with 2 small children, to be supported by his wife? Just imagine. Bell's voice trails off. Then more resolutely she continues, despite it all, my parents managed to send 2 children to college and live middle-class lives. But the AEC's deceit extracted a terrible price. I remember a lot of things, like how my father would insist that the doctors had experimented on him, then amputated his leg to study it. I felt, "You're mistaken," recalls Bell. My father and I had a personality clash, and I never made peace with my father. I never did understand why he was the way he was. I know now why he always insisted something was wrong with him. His family did not believe that Allen's amputation was medically necessary either, but they saw it merely as an expression of insensitivity toward devalued African American patients, not as an experimental scheme. Moreover, it did not help Allen's credibility when the family doctor, David Williams, M.D., called him a paranoid schizophrenic. What I saw was a fellow who had a loss of limb and became an emotional cripple because of it. He probably had paranoid schizophrenia all his life. Far as doing things, I thought he was using this possible exposure as a crutch, a reason, rather than doing as well as I would have liked to have seen him do. Government scientists had also lied to Williams, denying that any plutonium injection had taken place. In 1973, government scientists at Chicago's Argonne National Laboratory's Center for Human Radiobiology, CHR, told Williams only that they were bringing Allen to the CHR and to the University of Rochester, 2,000 miles away in upstate New York, for follow-up, since, as they put it, he has this unusual malignant tumor and has shown such a long survival time. But the 3-week journey to Chicago and Rochester, replete with flowers, limousines, a first-class private car on the Texas Chief, and a $400 honorarium, was not a celebratory jaunt to probe the secret of Allen's longevity. Rather, it was scientifically necessary because the scientists had to retrieve Allen's body tissues in order to inventory the lingering radioactivity and to measure any resultant physical damage from the experiment. Argonne placed Allen in its whole body counter to assess his skeletal radiation. Scientists cataloged his X-rays and even collected and tested his urine and excreta. They found radiation-induced jaw abnormalities and similar changes in Allen's other bones. Allen was then swept off to Rochester, where monitoring of his urine and stool found that, although his leg had been removed days after the injection, traces of radiation still lingered in his tissues. Allen died in a nursing home in 1991, just a few years after Eileen Wellsom's writings publicly validated his lifelong claims of abuse. "This has really turned our lives upside down, my brother and me," says Bell. "But my mother relives this experiment every day. Every day she thinks of the 50 years she and my father were together, trying to figure out why she was so naive and couldn't pick up on the fact that this was the government's doing. My mother has been a very moral person all her life. Why, we couldn't even gossip in her house growing up. But now, she doesn't feel too good about herself." More radiation experiments were to come. In some cases, blacks were only sparsely represented. In some, no evidence can be found for their participation at all. In others, they suffered at higher rates than did whites. That is, they were present at rates greater than their representation in the population. In still other radiation experiments, they constituted a large majority of the subjects, and some of these experiments focused specifically or exclusively upon African Americans. The plutonium victims were not the last blacks to be transfigured by radiation, but neither were they the first. The cleansing light of science. The first recorded black victims of radiation experiments lived around the turn of the century, long before the dropping of the atomic bomb. Near the end of 1895, German physicist Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen discovered a magical light. He found that passing electricity through special gases at low pressure generated electromagnetic radiation with strange and powerful properties. The rays imparted fluorescence and enabled him to make images that rendered solid objects transparent. Alive to the rays' potential for seeing inside previously opaque objects, but flummoxed by their mysterious nature, Röntgen resorted to calling them X-rays. Doctors found with delight that the X-rays could reveal all manner of skin blemishes, cancers, and even previously hidden internal problems. During the same period, physicians successfully experimented with radium for the purpose of healing. Radiation enjoyed a beneficent medical image, and scientists sought to seduce African Americans as well as whites with its power to heal and to purify. Any doctor who wished to embrace the newest fad in medicine could advertise his radium or X-ray treatments, and most of the doctors who did so treated patients in private clinics, rather recklessly by our standards. They were initially unaware of, and later insufficiently concerned by, the dangers of repeatedly bombarding patients with high radiation doses. Patients were even given bits of radium in glass tubes to carry about with them, so they could treat their own skin blemishes or superficial cancers. Physicians soon ventured beyond medical therapy to explore profitable cosmetic uses, and as early as 1900, doctors touted radiation to blacks as an escape into whiteness. A long-winded headline in the January 10, 1904 New York American announced, "Burning out birthmarks, blemishes of the skin, and even turning a Negro white with the magic rays of radium, the new mystery of science." The New York Telegraph predicted, "All coons to look white. College professors have schemed to solve race problem. while the Boston Globe biblically mused, "Can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard his spots? Radium light turns Negro skin white." All invoked the cutting-edge technology of scientific light to efface the dark disability of racial difference. And by every account, the black experimental subjects were not only willing, but eager. However, the news accounts were sketchy and error-ridden, and no accounts seem to have been recorded in scientific journals, nor were any follow-up studies performed to track injuries. In 1904, an unnamed black man entered the Philadelphia offices of Dr. Thomas E. Eldridge, asking to have a facial birthmark removed. The doctor told reporters that he successfully used a piece of radium in concert with X-rays to bleach the blemish. Then inspiration struck. Why not continue bleaching the man's skin until he achieved whiteness? After a month of daily treatments, Eldridge claimed that half the man's skin was whitened and predicted he would be completely white within a month. Many newspapers joined the Boston Globe in citing Jeremiah 13:23. Can the Ethiopian change his skin or the leopard his spots? This was a favored biblical passage of scientific racists, who embraced it as a metaphor for the immutability of racial characteristics. Reporters wondered at the scientists' achievement even as they mocked the racial ambitions of the black subjects. Since the news of the marvelous operation on his colored patient has become public, Dr. Eldridge has been besieged by Negroes who detest their natural color and wish to be changed to white men. Dusky mamas also have been imploring the doctor all day long to make their pickaninnies just like white chillin'. Doctors understood that such irradiation was dangerous. Eldridge himself said, "The danger of burning the skin of the patient being very great unless precautions are taken and the rays allowed for only a short time to strike the spot to be treated." A January 10, 1904 news story in the North American, Philadelphia, cataloged the dangers of X-ray bleaching. Its headline read, "X-rays don't turn a Negro white," says Professor Pancoast. "It is too dangerous. Skin burns and attempt to change color would be long and painful." University of Pennsylvania radiologist Dr. Henry K. Pancoast also questioned its durability. When the skin would regenerate white, would it remain white? In 1908, the New York Times article, "White Negro in Paris," reported on a black expatriate who, once ensconced in the City of Lights, arrived at the conclusion that the only beautiful people were those with white skins. The man went to Philadelphia for radium treatment and, once white enough, he returned to Paris. The man, however, had not reckoned with nature. He began to feel very uncomfortable, and then his skin began to change colors. In some places it is gray, and in others the gray is darkening into black, so that, at the present moment, the Negro is full of contrition for having tried to desert his race. Most journalists assumed that subjects were actuated by a belief that blackness was inferior, not by practical concerns such as escaping race prejudice. When the medical costs in burns and illness were invoked, these consequences were presented not as irresponsibility on the part of the physician, but as punished hubris. The new technology afforded scientific observers an opportunity to reaffirm the same belief belabored by Chapter 3's accounts of white Negroes in the circus. Race is more than skin deep, and a white Negro is still a Negro. Doctors had probably anticipated a brisk business in bleaching the skins of blacks with radiation, but the publication of its side effects squelched blacks' interest. Physicians were more successful with non-Anglo-Saxon European immigrants, to whom they offered radiation as the cure for another badge of ethnic inferiority, dark and coarse excess hair. Physicians charged enormous fees when they opened X-ray hair removal clinics with names such as Hirsutic Laboratories in the 1920s. advertisements in lower-middle-class immigrant neighborhoods reassured the ambitious that freedom from unwanted hair opens the gates to social enjoyment that are forever closed to those so afflicted. Historian Rebecca Herzig has described how for Mediterranean and Eastern European women, radiation was held out as a technology that would ease their entree into the impeccably white identity they desired by removing telltale dark hair from their upper lip, chins, and lower arms. But instead of hairless white skin, they developed radiation burns, cancers, and horrible disfigurement before suffering painful deaths. The resulting lawsuits spawned legal bans that eventually closed the clinics, and by 1970, researchers calculated that 35% of all women's cancers were traceable to X-ray hair removal. These blacks and ethnic women suffered burns, cancers, discoloration, tissue loss, anemia, severe sores, scarring, and hair loss. Such conditions were recognized as radiation side effects that also struck researchers who worked with X-rays or unshielded tubes of radioactive substances. Researcher Clarence Madison Daly, who manipulated X-rays in Thomas Edison's laboratory, was the first U.S. researcher to die from radiation-induced cancer in 1904. By 1911, more than 50 cases of X-ray-induced cancer had been reported. The hands of Nobel laureate Marie Curie, the discoverer of radium, were chronically covered with burns well before her death of radiation-induced leukemia in 1934. That year, black radiologist Rudolph Fisher, M.D., a Columbia University researcher and one of the luminaries of the Harlem Renaissance, he wrote The Conjure Man Dies, the first mystery novel published by an African American, also died of intestinal cancer caused by his work. By 1949, at least 65 American scientists had perished as a result of their work with X-rays. No one recorded how many technicians, janitors, and support staff died. But some radiation workers served as canaries in the coal mine. After World War II, the disappointing side effects in bleached Negroes and the ugly deaths of the young white radium girls, hired in 1913 by factories such as the Radium Luminous Material Company to paint the dials of luminous watches with radium-226 and the radium isotope mesothorium, joined the carnage in the wake of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings and the X-ray epilation patrons, to transform the public's image of X-rays and radium. Once beneficial and therapeutic, radioactivity was now seen as a treacherously malevolent force. American distrust of the scientists who wielded radiation for deadly but profitable schemes was projected onto a plethora of popular science fiction films that portrayed radiation as the scientific catalyst of horrendous aberrations of nature. Scientists were characterized as willing to exploit radiation's unnatural power for twisted curiosity, wealth, or personal glory. Even the popular meaning of the once neutral word mutation, to denote a radiation-triggered change in tissue or genetics, became malevolent. The white light of science had been sullied by bloody scandal. And when the government decided to test radiation on Americans after 1994, it chose to do so secretly. A little of the Buchenwald touch. The United States also chose to seek Nazi expertise. In 1945, the U.S. State Department, Army Intelligence, and the OSS, the immediate forerunner of the CIA, recruited former Third Reich scientists, granting them immunity, jobs, and new identities in a resettlement program for Nazi scientists. It was named Operation Paperclip, for the mode of identifying potential recruits, a simple paperclip placed on each of their dossiers. In exchange, the State Department asked that the scientists resume their old habits, working on secret, non-consensual research projects, many of which exploited patients, but this time throughout the United States. Many scientists, from rocket pioneer Dr. Werner von Braun to former Gestapo chief Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, entered the country under the aegis of Operation Paperclip. Between 1951 and 1956, for example, German physiologist and former Nazi Herbert Gerstner supervised a total body irradiation, TBI, project of 263 cancer patients at MD Anderson Hospital for Cancer Research in Houston, courtesy of Operation Paperclip. Gerstner irradiated the entire bodies of 30 of the hospital's 263 patients, whose ethnicities were not specified. The irradiation destroyed their bone marrow, resulting in fatal anemia and other complications. The patients died rapidly, and the hospital abandoned the experimental approach. In a 1950 memo to senior AEC staff, Dr. Joseph Hamilton warned that radioactive experimentation on the unwitting was unethical and illegal, a flouting of the recently adopted Nuremberg Code of 1947. Among other tenets, the code required that all human subjects be fully informed of experiments conducted on them, that animal studies be done first, and that no tests be conducted that might harm human subjects. Hamilton warned that the public would be outraged to find American scientists engaged in the very research for which American military lawyers and physicians had condemned the Nazis, as admittedly this would have a little of the Buchenwald touch. Via Operation Paperclip, the U.S. government supplied American hospitals and clinics with 700 Nazi scientists. Because the scientists conducted so many disparate studies, all in secret, no racial breakdown of the Operation Paperclip subjects is possible. By 1947, AEC's Colonel E.E. Kirkpatrick expanded the radiation programs when he secretly ordered radioactive injections be given unsuspecting patients and institution inmates throughout America. But why, when the dangers of radiation were already widely known? My father, Elmer Allen, was injected with plutonium a year and 11 months after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Why? Demands Elmerine Whitfield Bell. You had people exposed to high doses of radiation there. Why study here? Scientists did learn much from wartime injuries, but many expressed a need for a more precise quantitative understanding, which would allow researchers and military forces to avoid harm while working with radiation. However, the strongest clamor for the studies came from the military. Government scientists insisted that a detailed knowledge of radiation's dangers was necessary in order to protect soldiers who were thought to face radiation exposure from the Soviets. Robert Stone, for example, cited an underwater atomic detonation as part of Operation Crossroads in 1947, when radiologists could not reach a consensus about the exact radiation doses that would produce illness in the exposed humans. Experimentation was necessary to settle these questions once and for all, and animal experiments were thought inadequate.
Certainly don't want to do any nasty experimentation on Harambe the gorilla. We'll just save all of our kooky, lethal experimentation for the niggers. We will rest there. We are still in Chapter 9. Chapter 9. Context of white supremacy. If folks would like to participate, the number to dial is 641-715-3640. The code is 564943 pound. Absolutely staggering read. If you think you want to participate or share a comment, you should get your hand up like right now. We are not taking hands for people who wait until the very end of the program. You have roughly a half hour left to wait till the very end and say, oh man, I have something I just got to get in. You should get your hand up right now, and then we'll be sure to get you on the line. Thanks for the folks that were patient, because we didn't get everybody who had a hand up who did not get to share after the first audio segment. The caller at 9039, did you have commentary you wanted to share?
May I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Gus. Good evening to the callers and the listeners. Everybody. Just like everybody else, kind of piggybacking on what was said before the second clip, audio. Is these European Americans, pale people across the board are they're evil. I heard someone today say that they're premature. They're premature humans. They're not all the way to term. So it just made me think about raising children and how children act, and it's a whole process of a bunch of years put together, and it's like at the end you kind of see hindsight. You know what I mean? And it's the same way with dealing with the Europeans, dealing with white people. They're immature. They not to use a metaphor or anything, but they haven't come to term as far as understanding compassion, understanding love and things like that. And they've tricked us, as you say, they're smarter than us. They've tricked us into believing that being docile and humble and weak, and that's the way to make it. That's the way to go. And nothing, in my eyes, nothing is further from the truth. It's always, my mother isn't conscious. I'm trying to bring her in, but she always just told me, just if something don't make sense. She didn't tell me to just stand up. She told me if something don't make sense, stand up. And if you can't, some kind of way you got to fight it. It's many fields, and you can fight on every field. You're a black young man. And I just took that with me, and I see the way to handle them is either direct confrontation, direct cut everything off from the start, that nothing go by, or kind of I'm not sure how to put it, but in everything that they come at you with, once you understand what racism, white supremacy is, everything that comes your way, being educated to speak it back to them, kind of how you say in a question form, or question them about something. And I just want to just my heart goes out to the callers that I've heard, and I'm just a listener, and I'm a brother out here. I'm with all y'all. Just hold it down and keep learning. Gus, as you say, the most important thing to do is read, but I'm telling you, watching the movies that they put out, especially the horror movies, in my eyes, totally exemplifies their history, their makeup, who they are, what they're willing to do, what they've done, and what they will do. In my eyes, they're never going to stop. There's no changing. It's just, it is what it is, and we have to become stronger in our consciousness. And I'll mute my line on that.
For sure. All of the folks that I think we got everybody who didn't get a chance to share the first time around. Anybody who has comments who would like to share, I think everybody, your line should be open if you have commentary. Speak up. Let's not be bashful so we can include everyone.
Hi. I like to chime in on what that young man just said too. I like to watch some of their horror movies too, because that speaks exactly to what kind of beings they are. All that lovey-dovey crap they put out on TV is not real. That's just fake. But when they put out their horror movies and the psychological and the bloody horror, that's exactly what they are and who they are, and I have to keep that in my mind. I have to always be on top of that's the way they are. I can't let all that other nicey stuff override my way of thinking about them. And I just want to say that. Thank you.
For sure. Other folks who had comments, you should be with us.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right. Greetings. I wanted to get in just a couple of things. I wanted to go back to the previous reading. On the previous section that we read, on page 214, Dr. Washington writes, I wonder that he did not consider these dramatic scientific shortcomings before suggesting that the children in question should not have been born. And she was speaking of the Kloppheimer, the journalist who was a graduate of Harvard Medical School. And it just made me think, in her mind, again, it's almost like she's not perceiving that Black lives don't matter. As far as just that approach, she's going to take that approach because the victims are Black. So as long as they're Black, their lives don't matter, and they're going to justify killing or maiming or destroying Black life in any way possible, utilizing that white supremacist approach. So it to me shows another slight shortcoming in the author's perception of racism, white supremacy, because I think the biggest thing that white people have done, and Neely Fuller says it all the time, is deception. We have been so fooled and so conditioned to think that we have anything in common with white people, and that all people are the same, and we all have the same ambitions and wants, and nothing could be further from the truth. And until we start to really understand that the same people we walk around with, who are our doctors today, who work in our supermarkets, who drive our buses, are our doctors, all of that stuff, that these are the same people that are here now, are the same people from 500 years ago, the same people we're reading about in this book. And if we can get that on lockdown in our brains, that understanding that these savages, these predators, these creatures are literally, walking around. It's just like the movie They Live. We have to really put the glasses on, the white supremacy glasses on, to see who and what these creatures are. And I think if we can do that, we might be able to start making some headway, because this is just mind torture, some of this. I mean, it's brilliant, but it's a lot to really to read. Here she wrote on page 217, they gave him a whopping dose of plutonium, recalled Morgan in 1995 when speaking to an advisory committee on human radiation experiments, ACHRE. Interviewer, Wright Langham, the chemist who devised the human experiment, justified the toxic injection by explaining to the Manhattan Project physicians the subject was an elderly male whose age and general health was such that there is little or no possibility that the injection can have any effect on the normal course of his life. But Cade was only 53 and held down a grueling job hauling long trucks. Except for a cataract, he enjoyed excellent health. Wow. Just to hear him make this prediction that this irradiation of his body said that his general health was as such that there's little to no possibility that the injection can have any effect on the normal course of his life, lets you know that they predetermined that they were going to murder this man. That right there just literally lets you know they were going to murder him with this injection, and they saw the course of his life plummeting because they knew the results would be his death, and it would be a horrible, grueling death. And the psychopathology of these savages is just unfathomable. I think one of the previous calls had talked about, and I thought it was another major lack of understanding in the shortcoming of the author, where she wrote about Cade returned home to Greensboro, where he died 8 years later of heart disease, and she literally said unrelated to his injection. I mean, when you're giving someone radiation, there is no part of the human organism that is not detrimentally affected by radiation of any type. And I truly don't believe that any black people under this system for the last 500, 600 years have died of natural causes. I don't care what any doctor says. We have all been murdered. We are not living the optimum existence that the Creator has for us, because this system is designed to destroy us and kill us slowly. And the psychosocial conditioning is as such that we worship and we love this slow death. And the slow death is in the form of white people. They have acculturated us this way. And until we really start to see them for the premeditated psychopaths they are, we're going to be in some serious trouble. And I thought this was interesting that they said on page 218 that the term HP stood for human product. We have to understand that's what they see us as human product. We're not human in the true sense of the word. We're only human to them in the capacity with which they can use us and exploit us or kill us. And the story about with the brother. She wrote briefly. She wrote on page 223. My father and I had a personality clash. I never made peace with my father. I never did understand why he was the way he was. I know now why he always insisted something was wrong with him. And then on the following page, she writes about her mother. She talks about her mother. She says, Alan died in a nursing home in 1991, just a few years after Eileen Welson's writings publicly validated his lifelong claims of abuse. This has really turned our lives upside down, my brother and me, says Bell. But my mother relives this experiment every day. Every day she thinks of the 50 years that she and my father were together, trying to figure out why she was so naive and couldn't pick up on the fact that this was the government's doing. My mother has been a very moral person all her life. Why we couldn't even gossip in her house growing up. But now she doesn't feel too good about herself. This just shows how white supremacy destroys families. Her inability to get along with her father had to do with him being terrorized and just the overarching umbrella of white supremacy's influence on their family. And I've seen that in my own family, in my own relationships with my immediate family, my mother, my father, my sister. It's all ruined. And I know that it's a byproduct of this system. Her mother, her pain due to her inability to see what was being done to her husband. That's what I mean. We have blind faith in these people, and these people have nothing to do with us that will ever be positive or to our benefit. And with that, I'll mute my line. Thank you for taking my call, guys.
For sure. Folks that we have not heard from, if you had a comment, feel free, chime in.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I would like to, most of the comments was exactly what I was going to comment on, but Brother Cabe, Eb Cabe, was the first American to be injected with a massive dose of plutonium during the small 1940s pilot program under the direction of the Atomic Energy Commission and the Department of Energy. You know, it's kind of like the wrong place at the wrong time. Those doctors was under contract with the Department of Energy, and I guess that's federally funded. So they just injected this guy with plutonium, you know, under directions of a government agency. And that part about the confusion that the daughter had about her father, although he wasn't educated, he knew they had done something to him, Mr. Allen. And for his family not to believe him all of those years may have contributed to him drinking excessively and making his situation worse, actually, you know, but, you know, not being understood, the social aspect of it was probably just as devastating as the physical aspect. And only his best friend, you know, believed him. Yeah, that part about her father. But then these media outlets, the New York American announced burning out birth blemishes of the skin and even turning Negroes white with the magic rays of radium and the new magic of science. And what was interesting is after all of this, they said that all invoke the cutting-edge technology of scientific light to ethics, the dark disability of racial difference, and by every account, the black experimental subjects were not only willing, but eager. However, the news accounts were sketchy and error-ridden, and no accounts seem to have been recorded in scientific journals, nor were any follow-up studies performed to track injuries. I mean, it's sad, but just the state of affairs and the brainwashing, would have a lot of non-whites believe that whitening of the skin would help them in some type of way. And then last but not least, the United States allowing Nazi war criminals a haven, safe haven in the United States under Operation Paperclip, and allowing them to continue their research projects, secretly. That's like, oh, you guys did a good job over in Germany. Why don't you come over here? We got a bunch of subjects, our blacks. We'd like for you to perform some illegal and secret research on them. And it was interesting that the underwater atomic detonation, it's just a lot of things going on, experiments, and people have to be very careful. I even go to get x-rays now. I let the x-ray technician know, look, you do this right the first time, because you're not going to be retaking these x-rays on me. That's one of the tricks that they use to overexpose you to harmful rays. But I'll mute my line. Thanks for taking the call.
Right on, Mr. Demray. Anybody that hasn't been able to share after the second audio segment's conclusion? Anybody we haven't heard from?
Should I wait? Should I wait till somebody else goes?
Proceed.
I can wait.
Proceed.
I want to agree. They do. There was something I was thinking about when they were talking about all the hysterectomies. I guess I'm going too far back. But what they did was they switched to tubal ligations because people were catching on. They were seeing how many black people were coming in for this, that, and the other, and they were able to pinpoint them by looking at that hysterectomy scar. So that's when they switched over to tubal ligations, and they were putting intense coercion on black women back then to sign the paper for the tubal ligation immediately after having your baby. So a lot of people had tubal ligations and they never even knew it, but the hysterectomy, you could always find the scar, There are very few people who were doing the little tiny scar for the hysterectomies. But that's how they got, they went below observational level when it came to the 90s, and it's still now, And those tubal ligations, they are fully reversible. We have the microscopic techniques out there to do that, and don't listen to anybody who says, oh, we can't do that. You can get it reversed. The technology is there, but that's how they went below ground. And I just wanted to put that out there.
Right on. Other folks that we have not heard from, folks we haven't heard from, have commentary? Oh, did we get everybody? I will assume we nabbed everybody who had commentary, or everybody who had a hand up who had anything they wanted to add during the second segment. Everybody's line should be open. So if we haven't heard from you, I will just assume that you are satisfied at the time. Quickly, some of the things that stood out. Again, I'm just it is almost enough to leave one speechless reading this information. It's for me, it is very similar. Some of the conversations that I've heard people say about Roots and some of the other slave films, I have never seen a movie, documentary or otherwise, talking about slavery that provides as much of the gory, accurate details as some of the books that we've covered on this program. The Half Has Never Been Told, American Slave Codes, you can just go on and on. I have never seen one that gives as much detail that is as accurate. I have never seen a film that provides as much gory detail, accurate assessment, comprehensive information about terrorism as this book. Nothing compares, which is why I just repeat again, there's no comparison. Reading is way more important than watching television. I am certain they will never make a movie that is as accurate as what you're going to get from this book. That is the case with Tuskegee's syphilis experiment and anything else that you want to name. That said, there were several things that stood out. I'm glad Ross made the point about the code that they had about HP. You not even a name. You're just, a number and a label of, some nigger that we're going to do this to. The thing that stood out to me most when they were talking about Mr. Allen's family, it was absolutely crushing reading that, where this, as she said, not well-educated black male as a result of white supremacy. They certainly have made a deliberate, that's a whole nother conversation in books right there. They closed their schools in Virginia and many other places, but this black male who doesn't have a lot of degrees and college graduate and all that, to have him get to a point where he understands, like, man, they have deliberately experimented on me and taken my leg, not because they care about me or anything else, just so that they can continue their experiments. And just to have your immediate family, that's like, oh, he's just talking crazy and making up stuff and rah, and they just, oh my gosh, like the toll that this takes on you under the system of racism, white supremacy. And I guess for me it was salient for so many reasons, because I feel like I have heard that so many times from victims of racism, where they begin to understand, like, wait a minute, man, these white people are doing something to me or to us. If they begin to understand it on a broader scale, that this is not just me individually, that they're doing this to us on a large scale, and just to be completely rebuffed. You're talking crazy, you're some conspiracy theorist, I'm not going to sit here and listen to all of this. That is so common. That's one of the reasons I say all the time in terms of just being patient, even from myself. If I hear a black person and they're sharing their view on racism, and maybe they don't have all the facts, maybe they don't have all the names, maybe it's something, that I haven't heard or what have you, or it might not even make sense, just with the gravity of things that whites have done to us. I, at minimum, try to be patient and give that person the victim of the doubt that we don't even know the half. To reference Mr. Baptist's book again, we don't even know the half of what they have done to us. I don't care how nutty it sounds, how zany it sounds, how impossible it sounds. I'm going to give that black person the benefit of the doubt until I can go and do some more digging and research. And even then, if I can't find anything, I still might have to give them the benefit of the doubt, because it might not come out until 20 years later that, oh, wow, they were right. That was exactly what they were doing, and I just didn't listen, because we've been conditioned to just not validate, to just not view each other as credit. And it was so many layers to what happened to Mr. It was absolutely crushing. I give Harriet Washington just so many accolades for doing the scholarship to kind of unearth all of this. The portion where when she says his family members took his suspicions, not even his family members took his suspicions seriously enough to ask him why they had arisen. Whoa. And she goes on, she says, that his wife, that this just devastated her to the point that she couldn't even talk about it. And then she moves forward and she says, I know why he always insisted that something was wrong with him. His family did not believe that Alan's amputation was medically necessary either, but they saw it merely as an expression of insensitivity toward devalued African-American patients, not as an experimental scheme. Moreover, it did not help Alan's credibility when the family doctor, David Williams, M.D., called him a paranoid schizophrenic. And this is a direct quote from the doctor. Again, the scholarship here is just impeccable, where she gives a correct quote from Dr. David Williams, M.D., suspected white terrorist. What I saw was a fellow who had lost a limb and became an emotional cripple because of it. He probably had paranoid schizophrenia all his life, or as doing things. I thought he was using this possible exposure as a crutch, a reason rather than doing as well as I would have liked to have seen him do. I cannot even begin to fathom. Racists have experimented on me, exposed me to radiation. I don't even know what that is. I've lost my leg. And even before we even get to that, I got hurt on the railroad. My job won't even honor workman's compensation, none of that. Just get out of here, nigger. You lose your job and, we'll get another nigger to take your spot. I go through all of this. My family doesn't believe me. The family doctor, that should be in quotes, the family doctor says that I'm a paranoid schizophrenic. Basically, I'm some crazy nigger who has made up some excuse to blame white people for my problems because I'm too lazy and shiftless to go out and be more than I can be, even with my one. I mean, I can't even. That's why I said I've had more moments with this book where I have been absolutely staggered, speechless. There's nothing I could even say. I can only say the same thing I said last time. When people assert, racism is not as big as what you all are talking about. Everything doesn't have to do with racism. The layers of what whites have planned to do to us the next 10 years, the next 500 years, we do not even understand like a scintilla, not even a tenth of what is happening. It has such an astronomical impact on our lives in all areas of people act. It is amazing. I've said that consistently. Like if we had total understanding of racism, white supremacy, and all the myriad of ways that whites are waging war on us, I don't even think we could begin to comprehend how that has impacted not just us individually, us collectively, the entire planet on which we live, how much things are off balance because of what they are doing. It is mind-boggling. Just what's happening with Mr. Allen alone in this section. Staggering. I did highlight other things, but I mean, I don't even know what more to say other than I don't even think you could make a authentic film or representation of all of this because it would probably be too painful to watch. And who would even want to sit through something like, who's going to sit through this story with Mr. Allen and watch all of this play out if you even made an effort to tell it truthfully? I'm just going to scan down really quick to see if there's anything else that I should comment on before moving forward. There's a whole book, Operation Paperclip, that came out recently that gives more of the information about the Nazis that came over and whites working globally to share information about how they're going to terrorize us. I thought of Mr. Fuller when he says whites go to the bottom of the ocean and study one single grain of sand that is going to help them maintain a worldwide plantation, dominate dark people. The section, just continuing with Mr. Allen, amazing scholarship. I don't have enough accolades for Washington's work on this portion, where she says, where he gets this 3-week journey to Chicago and Rochester with flowers, limousines, and a first-class private car on the Texas Chief, and a $400 honorarium was not a celebratory jaunt to probe the secret of Allen's longevity. Rather, it was scientifically necessary because the scientists had to retrieve Allen's body tissues in order to inventory the lingering radioactivity and to measure any resultant physical damage from the experiment. Argonne placed Allen in its whole body counter to assess his skeletal radiation. Scientists cataloged his x-rays and even collected and tested his urine and excreta. That's what I mean. Like, this is the book that I'm going to point to from now on. Like, anytime, and I don't argue with people when they say, almost everybody, all the non-white people, black and otherwise, that I bump into, when Mr. Fuller's remark about whites being smarter than black people, smartest folks on the planet, this is what I'm going to have in mind from now on. This is the demonstration. If you need an illustration, a painful illustration about what it means to be smarter than somebody else. We know way more than what you do about what we've even done to you. We make it our business to study you down to, if that means we have to study your urine, if that means we have to go through and study your feces, whatever it means to make sure that we continue dominating you, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. Let's get it cracking. You won't even find out what we've done until you're dead, if at all. I will stop there. It is extraordinary, painful reading, but wow. I will just stop there. At any rate, we will be here next week. Study session number 8. We're still in chapter 9. She did drop some extraordinary books as we have been rolling. The Plutonium Files is one. You can check that out. Deals with radiation experiments that were conducted against everyone. The full book, The Plutonium Files, Americans' Secret Medical Experiments in the Cold War. I would definitely encourage folks to check that out. I would again insist, Killing the Black Body, Dorothy Roberts, mandatory reading. If you read that book with this book, oh wow, you will have a much more thorough, comprehensive understanding of what medical apartheid, white supremacy in the field of medicine is. And again, you can go back and listen in the archives when we had her on to discuss that specific book and her other books, which include Shattered Bonds, which is about racism within the social child welfare system, which is extraordinary, like 5-star, 8 thumbs up, exemplary read. And then Fatal Invention, I think that's her most recent book. She was on in 2011 to discuss that, which is the same subject matter, racism within the healthcare industry. Extraordinary scholarship. She is just phenomenal. Dorothy Roberts, always a hoot to read her material and speak with her. With that, we will wrap. We should be here tomorrow. Compensatory call-in, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We will have news, commentary. We'll have more time since Workplace Racism now has its own program. So if you have other things you would like to comment on, feel free, chime in. Look forward to hearing from everyone tomorrow. I hope the book has been worthy of your Friday evening. We'll be here next week. We are working our way towards the finish line. Incredibly powerful reading. I hope folks are sharing. This is a book you should have in your library. Anybody who's looking for material to read on racism, this should be one of the first books that you mention. And I will make sure that I get in. The first time that I heard about this book, it was a white woman who said, "Hey, you should read this book. It's really great. It's about racism. I think you will dig." This was like 2007. I don't even think the cows existed at the time. And she had already read it at the time. I was recommending that I check it out. I'm sure tons of black people have read it well, but just as I've said consistently, white people are not ignorant about racism. I think this book has made that point over and over and over and over. With that, again, sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. I think that came out in this section of the book as well. After racists tortured and experimented on and mutilated Mr. Allen when he began shrinking to deal with all the stress and terrorism and trauma from all of this, that certainly did not help. And that's generally the plan that they have set up after they have stressed and terrorized you to death. Hey, I know you feeling bad. Here, have a little tonic and you'll feel better. Have a little poison that we have concocted and this will make everything better. Reject that. Let's try to find some better remedies to deal with the stress from white terrorism. Alcohol is not going to help deal with these problems, nor any of their other drugs. That'll just be an excuse, as we heard in this book. That'll just be an excuse to have the next layer of racism, white supremacy. They have everything set up beautifully. That's what a system looks like. But sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. Certainly if you're going to be behind the wheel, driver, passenger, pedestrian. You do not want to be intoxicated and be stopped by Daniel Holtzclaw, Darren Wilson, any of their other race soldiers. You're making their job easy. They already got things set up that we don't even know about. You want to be sober, clear thinking, lucid, so you can make exemplary decisions to keep yourself as safe as possible, you and any other offspring or any other folks that you might be responsible for at that time. alcohol is not helping us solve any of our problems with white people. Buckle up if you're going to be in the vehicle as well. I say that all the time. Let's do everything we can to minimize contact with enforcement officers. That said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother.
Problem. You're a victim.
Man, I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.